Chapter 181. Even so, he shouldn't use that woman like that. Eyes frowned. He didn't say anything, but in his heart, he had long regarded Helene Vivian as his own younger sister, the kind of younger sister with brotherly affection. He had never seen such a woman. Too many things had happened to her. Even if it was a man, it was very likely that he would be unable to recover from this setback. But she was so free and easy, as if she could face anything she encountered. Her personality was good, and she was very gentle, especially when treating the elderly. Eyes knew that she obviously didn't have a gentle personality, but she would always take care of people. She had a sense of balance when interacting with people, making people feel very comfortable. It was no wonder that the people in the shop worshipped her like an idol, regardless of gender. However, it was because of this person that her family and power were taken away, and she was driven out by the Helene family. Without the support of the power behind her, it was more convenient to use her. He didn't deny that when he first came into contact with Helene Vivian, he also wanted to use her to achieve the effect of protecting the person at the top of his heart. After all, the situation in the capital was very unstable. There were some secrets that the people of the four great families didn't want to let the imperial court, and even the successors like them know. These secrets made Eyes uneasy, which was why he changed his attitude in recent years. But ever since he truly met Helene Vivian, he didn't have the thought of sacrificing another person to protect one person. After all, he wasn't a member of the imperial family, so he didn't have to go to that extent. It was just that the person he liked had no interest in him at all. She also didn't care who he would marry in the future. That was why he repeatedly tried to get close to Helene Vivian, wanting that person to regret it in the future. But when he did these actions, he was sure that even if someone really came to cause trouble for Weiwei, he would be able to deal with it. Because he cherished this friend. As for what the third prince was thinking, he had no way of knowing. If the other party really chose Helene Vivian to be his consort in order to protect the servant girl who was once very important to him, then no matter what happened in the future, Helene Vivian would have to shoulder it by herself. The competition in the imperial palace was even more fierce than in the family. In addition, the current empress was not the third prince's biological mother, and the emperor was always obsessed with women. Once Helene Vivian entered the palace, she would be like a piece of fish, waiting to be cut up. The third prince chose this third princess consort so that she could replace the woman at the bottom of his heart to block these knives. How could Helene Vivian have it easy? After all, the third prince's thoughts were too deep. It was hard to say why he was doing this. In addition, the news he received when he returned to the capital recently was also related to that maid. Soon, this news would spread to the capital. At that time, what would the third prince do? It seemed that when he arrived at the hidden spirit temple, he had to find an opportunity to have a good talk with that woman and have her stay a bit further away from the third prince. It would be best if she didn't involve herself in this relationship of endless benefits. Hazy didn't know that Helene Vivian was already involved, and that everything she did was voluntary. Because of Helene Vivian's identity, she was destined to be involved in this relationship of benefits. She definitely wouldn't stay out of harm's way. If she wanted to take back the Helene family, she first had to stand on equal footing with the four great clans. Because what she had to face was not only those traitors of the Helene family, but also the Su family, who had extraordinary influence in the court, Creek. At dusk, the wheels rolled through the last section of the journey to the hidden spirit temple. This section of the mountain road was very rugged. In addition, there were many trees on the mountain, so it wasn't very convenient to walk. Helene Vivian didn't open her eyes, but saw that Chen Wen-Wan, who was sitting across from her, had already woken up. Sitting across from her, Chen Wen-Wan looked at her with her eyes wide open. Seeing that she was awake, a smile appeared on her face. "Younger sister, you finally left. The road ahead seems to be blocked. The guards are at the fork in the road. In this kind of weather, it's indeed easy for something to happen." Helene Vivian curved her thin lips into a smile that wasn't a smile. In all likelihood, this road blockage was also man-made. Chen Wen-Wan used a handkerchief to wipe the water stains by the window. "Younger sister is right. We have to be a bit more careful. If the road ahead is really blocked, I reckon that in a moment, We'll have to walk all the way over. Hellion Vivian indifferently responded. As if it wasn't easy, Chen Wen asked one more sentence. Younger sister seems to be very close with young Master He. It's all right. Hellion Vivian smiled. Chen Wen lowered her eyes and wiped the window again. Younger sister is truly blessed. Don't talk about me. Elder sister Chen really guessed correctly. We have to walk the next section of the road up the mountain. As Hellion Vivian spoke, she lifted the curtain of the carriage and strolled out. It was still raining outside. In front, the young ladies of the great clans had already received the news from the guards on horseback. One by one, they walked down from the carriage, their maidservants holding umbrellas as they stood to the side and waited. Hellion Vivian and the others were more or less at the end of the group. After waiting for them to come down, they began to move forward again. However, this time, they switched to walking. From afar, Hellion Vivian could see a tall and straight figure standing in the middle of a group of people, untainted by the wind and dust. Hellion Vivian was puzzled. It was raining so heavily, yet not a single drop of water had splashed onto his body. As she thought of this, Hellion Vivian looked towards He Zi, whose black hair was already wet. She saw that raindrops were dripping down from his forehead. This was a normal situation. That person from the royal family was too abnormal. As if he had noticed her gaze, that person actually turned his face to look in her direction. She didn't know if it was because he was holding an umbrella or because it was raining, but that pair of eyes that were as deep as a pool of bones were deeper and colder than ever. It was as if not a trace of warmth could be melted into them. Just by looking at her like that, he was so cold that it made her teeth ache. Hellion Vivian was stunned. What was going on? She didn't provoke him, right? However, even if he was as unreachable as a god, there were still people who would worry about his safety. Eunuch Sun was the best example. Your Highness, the road ahead is too slippery. Please watch your step. Hellion Vivian looked at the continuously shouting eunuch and shook her head. She thought that with the royal family's degree of misophobia, even if you didn't remind him, he would still be very careful. Is there money on the ground? You didn't even raise your head when looking at it. When the cold voice sounded in her ears, Hellion Vivian always had the illusion that she was in the North Pole. Your Highness. Why did this man run to the back of the group? Hellion Vivian furrowed her willowy eyebrows. Beligaju looked at her coldly, the corners of his mouth pulled up in an arc that couldn't be considered a smile. Who else did you think it was? Hellion Vivian. She didn't think it was anyone. Do you often forget to bring your brain when you go out? Beligaju glanced at her empty hand, his eyes indifferent. Hellion Vivian. After not seeing him for a few days, this man's poisonous tongue was becoming more and more undisguised. Wait a minute, he came here specifically to mock her intelligence. Chapter 182. Just as Hellion Vivian was thinking, an incomparably soft fox fur cloak covered her from the top of her head, carrying a special scent of mint and sandalwood. Wearing it was very warm and comfortable. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her shapely eyebrows. This kind of action could easily attract other people's sidelong glances. At this time, letting those noble young ladies set their eyes on her wasn't a good thing. She didn't believe that third prince didn't understand this logic. Hellion Vivian opened her mouth and was just about to refuse. She heard Beligaju's indifferent voice announce, "Continue to walk forward. Those without umbrellas go to Eunuch Sun's place to get a windbreaker. Don't delay the time." The hidden meaning of these words was clearly blaming Hellion Vivian for slowing down their journey. Just a moment ago, Hellion Jiaoer's eyes still exuded poison flashed with a complacent smiling expression. With the maid holding the umbrella, she slowly curved her thin lips. Very good, they still haven't arrived at the hidden spirit temple, yet third prince already started to become impatient with that slut. Wait until they arrive at the hidden spirit temple. Once the plan is carried out, His Highness will even more regard her as a poisonous woman. The other people also had expressions of schadenfreude. You talk, I laugh, and continue to walk forward. No one actually went to get a windbreaker. Basically, everyone understood third prince's meaning. Even if His Highness spoke indifferently and politely, it was still difficult to conceal the disdain he had for Hellion Vivian. Only Eunuch's son didn't think this way. He just stood to one side and swallowed his saliva with all his might. That fox fur cloak wasn't Master's favorite clothing. Last year, young Master Lai left a handprint on it and was almost beaten into a pig's head by Master. But now, His Highness unexpectedly gave this cloak to a woman. Eunuch's son almost suspected that his own presbyopia had worsened. Or was it that retired emperor recently gave him too much pressure, and he dreamt that His Highness finally opened his eyes? My ass. Even if he opened his eyes, it still couldn't be this Miss Hellion. That would mean that he had to change from one nightmare to another. Moreover, when did His Highness let him prepare a cloak for everyone? He didn't have anything here. Eunuch's son roared in his heart, but there was a smile on his face. However, when he came back to his senses, he found that his master had already walked far away. He hurriedly took the umbrella and followed. Hellion Vivian didn't care what Beligaju thought, but she wasn't stupid. The current situation was much better than before, and she could enjoy the warmth of the cloak with peace of mind. I wonder how much the third prince's cape would fetch if I were to sell it. Last time, his handkerchief was sold for 10,000 taels of silver. This cloak was worth at least 10 times more. Return it to me after you're done. As if he saw through what she was thinking, the man's incomparably bewitching voice once again sounded from beside her ear. If I find out again that something that should be here with you has appeared in the market, whoever buys it from you, I will make that person close the door. He spoke the last few words very, very slowly, so slow that Hellion Vivian felt her scalp go numb. Only then did that slightly cold and indifferent voice go far away. His whole body was solitary and handsome. No matter when he looked at it, he was perfect to the point that he didn't have any flaws. Hellion Vivian secretly dispelled the idea of selling the item. If the third prince threatened that if she sold this cloak, he would make her look good, Hellion Vivian would completely ignore these words. If he threatened, then he threatened. She, the Queen of Arms, wasn't someone to be trifled with. But the man said that whoever bought her cloak would have that person close the door. This kind of two-faced method, how did he think of it? Hellion Vivian felt that she couldn't compare to the third prince in terms of shamelessness. Since she couldn't sell it, then she'd take it for herself. In any case, this cloak felt pretty good. Your Highness. Shadow quietly appeared behind Beligaju. He knelt down on one knee on the rainy ground. His whole body was dressed in black. Your Highness guessed correctly. There's a problem with this broken piece of wood. Beligaju's eyes flashed. Standing with his back against the light and under the setting sun, he was like a character who walked out of a manga. At this moment, his body was no longer indifferent and elegant. Instead, it was filled with a thick and heavy murderous aura. Protect the retired emperor well. Today, no one is allowed to enter the temple. Otherwise, kill without mercy. Yes. Shadow lowered his eyes and his figure once again disappeared. Originally, if they took a carriage, they would only need the time it takes to burn a stick of incense to reach the temple. But without the carriage, coupled with the fact that it had rained and the mountain was slippery, no matter how organized they were, by the time they reached the top of the mountain, the sky was already hazy and dark. Fortunately, the rain finally stopped. The imperial bodyguard who was leading the way ran over and was just about to knock on the door. Just as he was about to knock on the door, he heard a thick and old voice from inside, Amitabha. Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot. I didn't know that there was a distinguished guest coming. Sorry for not coming out to meet you, sorry for not coming out to meet you. That voice was deep and distant with an indescribable tranquility, making it easy for people who heard it to lay down their hearts and return to nature. The imperial bodyguard looked left and right. He could only hear the voice but could not see the person. Unable to open the door, he was so anxious that his forehead was covered in sweat. Beligaju casually walked over. His eyes fell on the imperial bodyguard's waist. His voice was indifferent. Take away the knife. The royal is still the most intelligent and thoughtful. As soon as he finished speaking, the wooden door slowly opened. An old man in his 60s stood there with white hands. He had a white beard and white eyebrows, wearing a Buddhist robe. He was the temple's abbot. He fiddled with his Buddhist beads and laughed. This old monk knew that the retired emperor was coming and had already prepared a vegetarian meal behind the temple. How about letting this disciple of mine lead the retired emperor over first? This old monk and the royal family haven't seen each other for many days. I still want to ask the royal family for advice on some Buddhist teachings. Basically, almost the entire Dragon War Empire knew about the grudge between the royal family and the Shaolin Temple. The situation was like this. That year, this temple's abbot was still a hedonistic young master who had not converted to Buddhism. He infiltrated the beggar sect's 3 major sects and became the leader of the entire capital. Beating anyone up was a matter of minutes, yet he fell into the hands of a little boy. Speaking of this matter, the temple's abbot was also unlucky. At that time, he mistook the 3rd prince for some family's young master and kidnapped him to the mountain. Then they were beaten up. How could there be such a child in this world? No matter how powerful he was, he should have counterattacked on the spot. That way, they would not have been wiped out in one fell swoop. Even now, whenever Abbot Fang Zhong thought of a certain person's words at that time, he would gnash his teeth in anger. What did he mean by being kidnapped is also quite interesting. Did they look like toys? Did they? Since that day, they were swept clean by the soldiers. At that time, Abbot Fang Zhong found out that the little boy was none other than the world-famous 3rd prince. Regarding this, Abbot Fang Zhong suffered a blow. Every time he did something, his purpose was to defeat this genius highness, including his conversion to Buddhism, because all the martial arts in the world were from the Shaolin Temple. This rumor was already not a secret in the capital. Therefore, as soon as Abbot Fang Zhong's words fell, everyone's line of sight turned towards Beligaju. He merely brushed away the non-existent dust on his fingertips and absent-mindedly said, "Want to find me to compete? Ask for advice on Buddhist teachings." Abbot Fang Zhong's expression didn't change as he corrected his words. Bailey Jiao grunted and faintly smiled like a demon. "Then forget it, I don't understand Buddhist teachings." Abbot Fang Zhong quickly opened his mouth. "It's a competition. A competition. Oh." Bailey Jiao lazily yawned. "It's cold on the mountain, I don't feel like moving." Abbot Fang Zhong, "Then you still want to compete with me, are you playing with me?" Chapter 183. Abbot, don't be impulsive. Seeing that the situation wasn't right, the little monk immediately reached out and hugged the abbot's trousers. "Let go of me." Abbot Fang Zhong rudely pulled his sleeve back. The arrogance on his face no longer had the slightest bit of immortal charm. "If I don't beat this stinking brat till he pisses his pants in terror, then I'm not surnamed Fang." Beligaju chuckled, the side of his face indifferent. "Your surname isn't Fang to begin with." Boom. Abbot Fang Zhong's temples throbbed, his entire person exploded. Eunuch Sun desperately blocked in front, holding a horsetail whisk to persuade. "Great master, calm down, calm down." After saying this, he was about to cry, saying in his heart, "Your Highness, don't provoke the great master anymore, can't you see that he's about to vomit blood because of you?" The young ladies and young masters behind were all dumbstruck. Was this really Hidden Spirit Temple's most respected great master? He really didn't look like one. Hellion Vivian actually didn't feel that this was unexpected. Her master and Elder Huan were also like this. Normally, they looked like they were floating in the air, but once they heard the 3 words 3rd prince, they absolutely loved and hated, gnashing their teeth in anger. It could be seen how much hatred a certain highness could attract. In this Dragon War Empire, there probably wouldn't be a 2nd prince as black-bellied as him. Abbot Fang Zhong, the vegetarian meal at retired emperor's side is still waiting. After the vegetarian meal, it won't be too late for you to discuss with the royal family. In short, let's leave first, dear ones. If this continues, our temple's image will be gone. Head Abbot Fang Zhong took a deep breath and brushed his own monastic robe. By the time everyone came back to their senses, he'd already recovered that steady, fairy-like demeanor. The speed at which he changed his expression was so fast that it made Wei Wei especially sigh. If this was in the modern era, he'd also be at the level of a movie emperor. Beligaju still didn't change the indifference on his face, as if he didn't take the old man's words to heart at all. Abbot Fang Zhong clenched his hands again, thinking that there was still a night to fight, so he slowed down his tone. Everyone, please follow this old monk. The female benefactors' banquets are set in the west wing, the male benefactors' banquets are set in the east wing. Hearing this, a young master curled his lips in boredom. I thought it was a man and a woman together. How boring. Don't worry, we'll still be able to tour the pavilion together at night. There will be plenty of chances. The several young masters smiled at each other, looking towards the side of the outstanding girl. Waving the paper fans in their hands, they followed head Abbot Fang Zhong into the East Wing room. The young ladies of the aristocratic families had long expected this situation. Although they had all reached the age of marriage, each of them had a target in their hearts, and even today, their hearts were beating a little faster. But in ancient times, the most important thing was reputation. The abbot's arrangement was exactly what they wanted. Just like what their mother had taught them, the more they couldn't touch those men, the more they would miss them. Ladies' almsgivers, this is the place. The little monk who led the way put his palms together and made a remonstrating gesture. The young lady surnamed Liang sized up the room and frowned slightly. Why is the place so small? The young monk paused in his footsteps and said with a faint smile, the temple is simple and crude. Please forgive me, benefactress. The young lady of the Liang family still wanted to say something. A slightly deep voice came from the other end. He, it seems that Minister Liang's beloved daughter is not satisfied with the temple's arrangement. It turned out to be the retired emperor who had already finished his vegetarian meal. Behind him were several assisting ministers and womenfolk. The overly familiar figure made Hellion Vivian clench her fists one by one. That figure was standing among the accompanying womenfolk. She was wearing a pure white long dress embroidered with lotus flowers, a jade pendant of safety hanging in front of her chest. Her long hair was tied up into a flower. One hand was twirling sparkling and translucent Buddhist beads, the other hand was on a maid's arm. She slowly walked over. Her appearance was well maintained. She was clearly already in her 30s, but she looked like she was only in her early 20s. That year, she had relied on this kind of otherworldly and delicate appearance to capture the heart of that scumbag of a father. Su Yang Mo. The name she would never forget in this lifetime. At that time, her mother was already at the end of her life. Her chest was gasping for air and her body was deteriorating day by day. However, she was still dignified in front of others. Even if she was terminally ill, she never lost face in front of Su Yang Mo. It was only when she felt that she couldn't take it anymore that she made a request to Hellion Guang Yaro, asking him to be lenient to her daughter on account of their relationship as husband and wife for more than 10 years. Her mother had never begged anyone in her life. However, at the last moment, she begged someone for her. Hellion Vivian had already forgotten what the scene was at that time. Her memory seemed to have been stimulated by something and became a little fuzzy. She only remembered that woman bringing her maid to the side room and mocking her mother word by word. Sister, don't be silly. What do you think you can do by holding on like this? So what if you're more powerful and talented than me? Your husband still chose me in the end. That's why I say, everyone has their own fate. Don't fight with the heavens. In the end, the one to suffer is also you. Hellion Vivian closed her eyes tightly. When she opened them again, her pupils had already become clear. It was ridiculous when she thought about it. When the Su family spread rumors about her mother being rude, why didn't they think about what their own family had done? She had a child with a married man before she was even married. Her family was broken and her family was dead. Such a big hatred. Until now, she had finally seen the culprit of all this. Hellion Vivian slowly let go of her hand and restrained her anger. She returned to her calm and indifferent appearance. However, when the official with the surname Liang heard the words of the retired emperor, his expression changed instantly. He knelt on the ground and anxiously explained, "My daughter is young and did not mean it. Please forgive her, retired emperor." Sigh. The retired emperor smiled and waved his hand. He looked very amiable and did not show any anger. However, when he said the next sentence, the young lady of the Liang family also changed her expression. "If you are not satisfied, you can go down the mountain. There is no such thing as a crime. Minister Liang, you are too serious." Minister Liang wiped the sweat on his forehead and did not dare to get up. Yes, what you said is right. It is better to be quiet in the temple. After the retired emperor said this, he continued to lead the officials forward. He had no intention of letting the official with the surname Liang get up. The young lady of the Liang family was stunned. She really did not expect that because of her words, she would fall into this situation. Was this the legendary emperor's prestige? She did not understand, but it did not mean that the accompanying officials did not understand. During this period of time, the Liang family was too favored. They were too favored and became arrogant. The retired emperor was not like the emperor. He was very clear-minded. This time, in addition to praying for blessings, he also wanted to take the opportunity to see the character of these young ladies. Since the first one to stand out was the young lady of the Liang family, he had to suppress her. It would also prevent others from having thoughts that they should not have. Chapter 184. Using both kindness and severity was the method of a ruler since ancient times. Hellion Vivian saw this scene but didn't say anything. She only curved her lips. This trip to the hidden spirit temple wouldn't be as peaceful as the retired emperor had hoped. Eldest Miss Hellion Vivian was just about to enter the side room to eat when she was stopped in her tracks by an outstanding-looking servant girl. That servant girl was none other than Su Yang Mo's personal servant girl, Xiaolian, who served her all year round. She slowly walked towards Hellion Vivian. She was wearing a light pink long dress with satin on the outside. Although it couldn't be considered very beautiful, it revealed the amorous feelings that had been cultivated over many years. She was only a servant girl, but she ate and used better than her, a true member of the Hellion bloodline. Eldest Miss, Madam knew that you were driven out of the family and was upset. She didn't have much money on her, so she ordered this servant to bring you some jewelry. Madam said that you're about to get married and need these things. She was worthy of being Madam Su's head servant girl. Her eyes were obviously hiding disdain, but every word was appropriate. Hellion Vivian didn't immediately take the jewelry bag in her hand. She only curved her lips into a smile and seemed to be indifferent. How many years have you been in the Defense Division's residence? Xiaolian obviously didn't expect her to ask this kind of question. She was only slightly stunned and then answered, "This servant has been in the Defense Division's residence for almost 8 years. Wasn't it 8 years? When she was 7 years old, her mother passed away. The Defense Division's residence changed owners and Madam Su took power. Although she was still alive, she was raised to be a good-for-nothing. She looked on helplessly as there was enmity that couldn't be avenged, injustice that couldn't be heard. So it turned out that 8 years had already passed." Hellion Vivian took a deep breath. It was as if she could feel a slight chill in her breath. The more it was like this, the more harmless her smile became. "I'll accept these accessories. When I go back, I'll tell Madam Su that I, Hellion Vivian, thank her for taking care of me all these years." Xiao Lian wrinkled her eyebrows as she watched Hellion Vivian's departing figure. She felt that the other party's words just now had a hidden meaning behind them. However, after carefully thinking about how this trash had handled matters previously, Xiao Lian felt relieved. It wasn't that she hadn't heard of it before, and had also heard of Hellion Vivian's recent deeds. However, no matter how formidable she was, she still hadn't made any progress in the area of handling matters. This kind of character that didn't care about the consequences of others was the easiest to fall for other people's tricks. No matter how she looked at it, she only had some martial talent and didn't have the slightest bit of other things. Such a little girl dared to make things difficult for Miss Jiao. She was simply acting recklessly. In the past, Madam had disdained to deal with her because she was simply flattering her to death, causing this girl to live in a fog. Now that this girl actually didn't want to live like this, then her time of death had arrived. Xiao Lian lowered her eyes, which were imprinted with a venomous intent. "Madam." Millimeter. Su Yang Mo, who was walking among the crowd, slowed down her pace. Little Lian leaned over and said in a low voice, "This servant has already given the jewelry box to that girl according to Madam's instructions." It was just as Madam had expected. That girl would never refuse money. Su Yang Mo turned the prayer beads in her hand. The setting sun fell, covering the entire temple's radiance. The night gradually enveloped the temple. After the rain, the temple unexpectedly appeared a little gloomy. After the vegetarian meal, according to the rules of the past, the students could rest. They could also go to the other courtyard to burn incense and divine their marriage. After waiting for the retired emperor to finish praying for blessings, only then would they go to the pavilion to appreciate poems. Hellion Vivian had just walked to the side room she was staying in. She casually picked up the teapot on the wooden table, wanting to pour a cup of water, when she heard a knock on the door from outside. Opening the door, she saw Chen Wen, who was riding in the same carriage as her today, standing outside the door with an umbrella in her hand. She changed her clothes and said in a low voice, "Sister, it's time to make a move." A heavy downpour came crashing down. Left with no choice, all the students put on cloaks and brought paper umbrellas into the main hall. It was inevitable that they would be disrespectful to the gods, but the retired emperor wasn't an unreasonable person. Seeing that the rain was so heavy outside, he simply ordered Eunuch Sun to call everyone to the side hall to save them from being drenched. The little eunuch who passed on the message was the one who arranged the carriage for Hellion Vivian. He shook his head. "It's really strange. Why is the rain so heavy this year? I've never seen such heavy rain in the past." "Isn't it just a rain? You're making it sound a little too bizarre." Another one disagreed. The little eunuch's eyes turned, pretending to be serious. "How is it bizarre? Look at the trees by the side of the road when we came. They were so thick, but they were broken. According to the folklore, this is a sign of great evil." "Really?" That person looked left and right, feeling his whole body turn cold. The little eunuch lowered his voice. "Generally speaking, women aren't allowed to enter the temple. However, these young ladies all have precious bodies, so there shouldn't be any problems. I'm just afraid that some of them are fated to be the bane of others, offending the Buddha." "When you say it like that, it does make some sense." Under the eaves, the two people whispered, so it was hard to avoid being overheard by others. Under this kind of atmosphere, both men and women loved to gossip. They just happened to use this matter as a starting point. The more they talked, the more excited they became, and the more outrageous they became. Hellion Vivian stood at the side, leaning against the window. Looking at the pouring rain outside, she lightly wrinkled her eyebrows. She didn't know if it was because of the bad weather, but ever since she entered the temple, Hellion Vivian felt that she couldn't figure out what was going on. It was probably because Yuan Ming was asleep again. Without his annoying voice, she really couldn't get used to it. This time, it wasn't because he wanted to cultivate, but because the devil and Buddha were always at odds. "Younger sister, retired emperor is about to come out. Watch carefully." Chen Wen stood at Hellion Vivian's side, quietly reminding her, "Don't forget the thing I gave you." Hellion Vivian faintly grunted, then stood up straight. The wooden door opened. Abbot Fang Zhong led retired emperor and his entourage out. He put his palms together, not the least bit of the irascibility he had when he first entered the mountain. Instead, he had the demeanor of a great master, with a compassionate heart. Amitabha, Shanzai, retired emperor is wholeheartedly devoted to Buddha. This is my Buddhist sect's great fortune. Great master is too courteous. Retired emperor also put his palms together, returning the courtesy towards Abbot Fang Zhong. The smile on his face was very tolerant and magnanimous. Abbot Fang Zhong laughed, then continued to lead the way. "According to your habits every year, this old monk has already had people prepare spring water and green tea. Please. I'm also old, I only love the great master's peace and quiet here. This time, I've brought a few more people. Great master, please don't find it annoying." Retired emperor said as he walked outside, "Great master, please take a look, which girl here has a good fate? That grandson of mine is also about to be decided." Chapter 185. Head Abbot Fang Zhong glared, smelly. No, what this old monk means is, the royal family's fortune fills the heavens, and they have good karma. Whoever marries him will be unlucky. If this kind of man marries over, won't she be angered to death? Moreover, will that stinky brat have a wedding night? Ha 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 ha, who knows, his face will turn black halfway through. How could retired emperor not know that Abbot Fang Zhong wanted to say stinky brat? However, he didn't expose him. Instead, he smiled meaningfully, then we'll have to rely on Great Master's auspicious words. Let's go, don't let those juniors wait anxiously. There wasn't much time to go from the main hall to the side hall, only a dozen or so steps away. When the students saw retired emperor come out, they bowed one after another. Just as retired emperor was about to tell everyone to rise, he heard a dong sound. It seemed like something had fallen onto the ground. Because of the excessive silence in the temple, the sound was extremely ear-piercing. Everyone looked towards the source of the sound, stopping on Hellion Vivian's body. Hellion Vivian glanced sideways, squinting her eyes at Chen Wen-Wn, who was standing beside her. Chen Wen-Wn acted as if she didn't see Hellion Vivian's gaze, her face revealing an astonished expression. Wei, why do you have so many things on your body? Hellion Vivian's lips curled into a cold smile, her arms crossed in front of her chest. What I have on my body, isn't Big Sister Chen clearer than anyone else? If it wasn't for her earlier bump, how could these things have fallen? It was agreed upon that when the time came, she would bump into Hellion Jiaowa. However, the one who was bumped into was her. It was truly a good play. It's nothing more than some jewelry, little sister can just pick it up. As she spoke, Chen Wen-Wn bent down, then as if she had seen something extremely frightening, her entire body trembled. What is this? Originally, the noise just now had already attracted retired emperor's attention. Now that Chen Wen-Wn was acting like this, it naturally had an effect. Retired emperor walked over with a group of ministers, frowning deeply as he asked, "What's going on?" "No, nothing's going on." The more Chen Wen-Wn acted like this, the more suspicious people became. The retired emperor narrowed his eyes and was about to walk over. The Hellion Jiaowa was stunned as she looked at the things on the ground. This jade bracelet, this pendant. Aren't these all mother's? Big sister, why are you wearing mother's jewelry? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and laughed. Which mother are you talking about? What is that? Hellion Jiaowa didn't care what Hellion Vivian answered. She stepped back and said, "Witchwood, you actually brought witchwood into the temple." Hearing this, everyone sucked in a breath of air. No wonder there have been so many strange things happening all day. It turns out that someone is causing trouble. She's still wearing Madame Sue's jewelry. She must have been cursing Madame Sue the entire time. This Hellion Vivian is really bold. If it were me, I wouldn't even dare to touch those evil things. Just wait and see. The retired emperor won't forgive her. Originally, she came to pray for blessings. Bringing such an evil thing into the temple, no matter how sincere she is, she won't get any good news. At this time, the retired emperor had already walked over. His long sleeves brought out waves of coldness. His eyes swept over the piece of black wood that exposed the yellow cloth on the ground. His face sank. Who brought this in? For a moment, the side hall was incomparably quiet. Chen Wen-Wn lowered her eyes. Her voice was just like her person, very gentle. Reporting to the retired emperor, these all fell from the eldest Hellion Miss. The retired emperor's eyes suddenly sharpened as he looked towards Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian didn't deny it. "Just now, I was bumped by Big Sister Chen. That's why the jewelry fell and disturbed the temple's peace." Asking the retired emperor for forgiveness. Chen Wenwan's eyes drooped. Feeling wronged, she said, "Little sister, you're saying it as if I deliberately bumped into you. But now that things have come to this, Big Sister doesn't care what little sister thinks. Only, how could little sister bring such a malicious thing into the mountain? What if it harmed someone? A piece of wood, a few pieces of jewelry, who could harm?" After Hellion Vivian finished speaking, she wanted to go pick up the scattered objects on the ground. Hellion Jiaowa stepped forward and pressed down on her wrist. She seemed to have been angered by something. Her eyes were completely red. "Big sister, I admit that I've always treated you well. But now, I can't shield you. The pieces of jewelry you're talking about, every one of them belonged to my mother. That piece of wood on the ground is the world's most vicious piece of wood. If you don't give me an explanation, I won't let it go." "Explanation?" Hellion Vivian smiled. "These pieces of jewelry were given to me by Xiaolian during the meal. She said it was your mother's dowry for me. Helian Jiawa tilted her head, as if she was pondering something. Soon after, she said to the Emperor Emeritus, in order to investigate this matter clearly, I ask Emperor Emeritus to allow this commoner to call Xiaolian in. The Emperor Emeritus raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, summon Xiaolian into the hall. Head Abbot Fang Zhong stood to the side. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but sigh. These kinds of methods were commonly seen in prestigious families before he had converted to Buddhism. This kind of situation clearly showed that there was someone who wanted to mess with that girl. He reckoned that letting that servant girl called Xiaolian in would only make the situation worse. The intelligent Beligaju naturally saw through this situation. His long and narrow eyes narrowed as he said in a cold tone, "It's only a few items that dropped, is there a need to make such a big fuss?" Head Abbot Fang Zhong picked his ears in astonishment. He didn't hear wrong, right? This brat was speaking up for that girl? How was that possible? How could he speak up for a girl? It must be that this brat felt vexed and thought that the investigation would be more troublesome. That's why he said this. The Helian Jiawa also thought the same. She bashfully smiled at Beligaju, "Your Highness, it's not a big fuss. It's just that your Highness doesn't understand the insidious nature of this Gu Mu. This matter must be investigated clearly." Beligaju didn't speak again. He only raised his eyes and glanced at the Helian Jiawa. That glance didn't have any warmth, breaking all of his elegance. It was like a snake hibernating in the underbrush, so cold that it made people tremble with fear. Helian Jiawa indescribably shivered and shifted her line of sight. Her gaze fell on little Lian, who was just walking in. It was originally arranged, so Xiaolian wasn't very far away. She stood outside the side hall and waited, only waiting for the summons. This servant Xiaolian greets Emperor Emeritus. Long live Emperor Emeritus. Xiaolian knelt on the ground with proper etiquette, lovable and gentle. The Emperor Emeritus waved his sleeve, "Stand up." After he finished speaking, the Emperor Emeritus glanced at the Helian Jiawa, "If there's anything, you can ask her yourself." The Helian Jiawa said yes. She didn't waste time and bluntly asked, "Xiaolian, let me ask you. Did you give the jewelry on the ground that belonged to mother to eldest sister during the vegetarian meal?" Reporting to Miss, this servant did indeed follow Madam's orders to give eldest Miss a bag of jewelry during the vegetarian meal. After Xiaolian finished speaking, she pretended to be puzzled and tilted her head, but in that bag of jewelry, most of it was hair ornaments and hair ornaments, not the ones on the ground. She was lying. Helian Vivian's pupils constricted, her gaze also gradually darkening. Chapter 186. Eldest sister, what else do you have to say now? Helian Jiawa abruptly turned her head, her pair of beautiful eyes looked at Helian Vivian as if she was looking at a heartless thief. "How mother treated you, everyone saw it with their own eyes, yet you treated mother like this. Not only did you not consider her good, but you even got the witch wood and her jewelry to put a curse on her. Eldest sister, you're so ruthless." This time, it could be said that the evidence was conclusive. Xiaolian's answer further proved Helian Vivian's crime. Everyone looked at Helian Vivian, that kind of gaze was like she was a poisonous woman. Retired Emperor's face also carried a bit of displeasure. He didn't expect that during this trip to Hidden Spirit Temple, someone would dare to use the Gu in front of him. Nothing had happened yet Helian family's girl dared to do this kind of thing. Wait until they arrived at the palace, then it would be terrible. Even if someone set a trap for her to fall into, that would also be bad luck. Retired Emperor wrinkled his thick eyebrows, his voice heavy as he said to Helian Vivian, "What else do you want to say?" Helian Vivian faintly smiled. "This servant girl's jewelry was indeed given to me by this servant girl. This servant girl doesn't understand why she would lie, but there is one thing I ask retired Emperor to investigate clearly. Eldest Miss, even if this servant girl is a servant girl, this servant also understands what is called propriety, justice, integrity, and shame. Don't wrongly accuse this servant." Xiaolian felt wronged and her eyes reddened. Those tears fell on her small, egg-like face, actually somewhat delicate and pitiful. Helian Vivian took a step forward, reached out and pinched her lower jaw. Tilting her head, she curved her thin lips, then slapped her. Slap. That kind of crisp sound reverberated in the side chamber, appearing particularly ear-piercing. Not only was Xiaolian stunned by the slap, even Eunuch Sun next to retired emperor was also shocked. According to reason, under this kind of situation, shouldn't she apologize to retired emperor as soon as possible? This eldest Miss Hellion not only didn't apologize, but also slapped that servant girl. Such an arrogant hedonist. Did she want retired emperor to give her the death penalty? Xiaolian never thought that Hellion Vivian would be so bold as to slap her in front of the Emperor Emeritus. She was Madame Su's head maidservant and had been in the general's residence for so many years. She lived a more comfortable life than some of the young misses in the capital. When had she ever been bullied like this? Xiaolian's entire body trembled. She was so angry that she couldn't even utter a single word. The retired emperor didn't expect this result and was about to fly into a rage. She then heard Wei Wei's tone of voice faintly say, "I'm talking with retired emperor, when did it become your turn to interrupt? Or is it to say, based on your looks, you can also make retired emperor unable to distinguish right from wrong and punish me for no reason at all?" As soon as her voice fell, the people around her sucked in a breath of cold air. This was especially true for Eunuch Sun, who was standing at the side. Even his hands were trembling. This Hellion Vivian really had guts. She actually dared to say such a thing. How could the retired emperor not understand? These words were simply meant for him to hear. In a split second, his face turned green as he continuously spat out a few words. Good, good, good. The eldest young miss of the Hellion family is truly as she said. Rude and unreasonable, unbridled, and disregarding the consequences. This old man wants to listen carefully. When did I not distinguish right from wrong? The retired emperor doesn't need to be so angry. Sometimes, when a person's acting skills are too good, it's indeed hard to see through them. What's more, you're also old. It's hard to avoid seeing things wrongly for a moment. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. No matter who was standing in front of her, that queenly air didn't diminish in the slightest. Apart from his own treasured grandson, there was no one else who dared to anger him like this. The retired emperor sneered, "Hellion Vivian, do you know that based on these words of yours, this emperor can take your life?" Of course, Wei believes in the majesty of the emperor. Hellion Vivian's tone changed. However, in my heart, the retired emperor has always been a wise and discerning monarch. You wouldn't casually take someone's life. I won't hide it from the retired emperor. When I was young, I worshipped you the most, retired emperor. The retired emperor stared blankly. How could one give a person a slap and then give a red date? How the fuck was he supposed to call someone to drag her out and behead her? Cough, cough. Head Abbot Fang Zhong, who was standing to one side, wanted to laugh when he heard this. Unfortunately, there weren't many occasions, so he could only pretend to clear his throat. In fact, Head Abbot Fang Zhong especially wanted to ask, where did this girl pop out from? Why was she the same as that stinky brat? When she spoke, it made people feel both hateful and itchy, yet they couldn't do anything to her. Thinking about this, Head Abbot Fang Zhong looked towards a certain person and saw that person slightly narrowed his eyes. His black jade-like pupils carried a thick sense of danger. Head Abbot Fang Zhong furrowed his brows in puzzlement. Why did this stinky brat have such a strong murderous aura? No one provoked him, right? Could it be that it was because that girl's words offended the retired emperor? While Head Abbot Fang Zhong was still guessing on this side, Hellion Jiaoa had already opened her mouth. Lian, who was stroking Xiaolian, spoke in an indignant tone, "Big sister, you're going too far. Do you think that just because you said that, the retired emperor will spare you? You cursed my mother. Xiaolian only spoke the truth, yet you beat her up like this. Is there still justice in this world?" Saying this, Hellion Jiaoa walked in front of the retired emperor and heavily knelt on the ground with a pa sound. "Retired emperor, Xiaolian has followed my mother for more than 10 years and has never done anything wrong, yet she ended up like this. Jiaoa earnestly asks the retired emperor to give this commoner girl justice." Hearing this, the retired emperor pressed the space between his eyebrows. He didn't even look at Hellion Vivian again. He waved his long sleeve, annoyed and somewhat perfunctory. He originally wasn't like this. After all, That grandson of his had never asked for anything. However, this Hellion Vivian really made people not dare to compliment her. This kind of vicious and merciless girl, how could he feel at ease leaving her by his grandson's side? Shadow, who was following beside Beligaju, saw the retired emperor wave his hand. His footsteps paused, and he subconsciously looked towards His Highness. However, before Beligaju could open his mouth, Hellion Vivian chuckled, "Younger sister keeps on cursing. Just now, I wanted to ask younger sister. You only saw a corner of that piece of wood and didn't know what was written on it, yet you insist that the wood on my body was which wood? Younger sister, how much do you want the retired emperor to punish me? That's why you spared no effort." Hellion Vivian said the last sentence very indifferently. However, in Hellion Jiao's ears, it was extremely stupid. She was still defending herself in this kind of situation. It was truly laughable. Could it be that she couldn't see that in this kind of situation, no matter what she said, the retired emperor wouldn't spare her? Servant Xiaolian also thought so. She sneered in her heart, but her face was tearful. "Eldest miss, something has happened. It doesn't matter if you wrongly accuse me. After all, I'm just a servant. Even if you wrongly accuse me to death, it's not worth anything. However, Miss Jiao's heart is kind and pure, yet you say this about her. Eldest miss, you've really gone too far." Chapter 187. This wasn't just excessive, it was simply malicious. The young misses and young masters of aristocratic families all looked at Hellion Vivian with disgust. Their glances were so hateful that they immediately punished this evil woman, Hellion Vivian. "Wrongly accused?" Hellion Vivian smiled, her voice neither fast nor slow. "Whether or not you were wrongly accused, it doesn't matter what you say. You have to find a witness." As she spoke, she raised her eyes and bowed towards head abbot Fangjong. "Great master, ever since this commoner entered the temple, this commoner's heart has been uneasy. After receiving this jewelry bag, this commoner immediately asked the young master by your side to consecrate this commoner's jewelry for the sake of warding off evil spirits and praying for blessings. I didn't expect that it would now become evidence to prove this commoner's innocence. Would it be possible for the young master to enter the hall now?" "What?" Xiaolian raised her eyes in disbelief. That small tear-stained face instantly paled. The Emperor Emeritus frowned, but didn't say anything. Head Abbot Fangjong saw Hellion Vivian's calm and quiet eyes looking at him. She claimed to be from a sect where the cool breeze comes naturally, the sea of clouds doesn't move. He felt that this matter was quite interesting, so he smiled. "Of course. Wu Dao, go call Wu Fan over." "Yes, Abbot." The little monk accepted the order. Not long after, he brought someone in. "Abbot, you were looking for me?" "This old monk wasn't looking for you, it was this benefactress who was looking for you." The little monk followed head Abbot Fangjong's gaze and looked over. After seeing that it was Hellion Vivian, a bashful expression appeared on his fair face. "Benefactress, it's you." "It's me." Hellion Vivian put her palms together and greeted politely. "Little master, look at the things on the ground. Are they the jewelry that I asked you to consecrate just now?" The little monk didn't understand why she asked this. Looking at the jade pendants and bracelets scattered all over the ground, he couldn't help but sigh. Amitabha, consecration is the gospel given by Buddha. How could benefactress not know how to cherish it? "Little master, you've misunderstood. It's not that she doesn't know how to cherish them. It's that someone wants to frame her. They deliberately bumped into her and insisted that she stole these things." A deep and ruminating voice sounded from the side of the door. Everyone looked over, only to see He-Eyes, who hadn't said a word all this while, lazily leaning against the wooden door. He crossed his arms over his chest and raised his eyes, his gaze indifferent. As soon as He-Eyes finished speaking, not only did Xiaolian's entire body tremble, even Chen Wenwan's face paled as she took a large step back. Why did young Master He speak up for that woman? The little monk was stunned for a moment before he answered instinctively, "These things all belong to that female benefactor." As he spoke, he pointed at Xiaolian and then at Hellion Vivian. "I gave it to this benefactress." This poor monk was right outside the room at the time and saw it with his own eyes. "How can you say that I stole it?" That is to say, someone really did lie, and kept saying that he was wronged and had a sense of propriety. He eyes glanced at Xiaolian with a faint smile. Madame Su's maidservant has truly opened this young master's eyes. With a snap sound, the jade bracelet in Xiaolian's hand fell to the ground, shattering into pieces. Her eyes shook as she tried her best to suppress the panic on her face. She never would have thought that this woman would ask someone to consecrate these accessories right after she left. Was this still that uncivilized girl who didn't understand anything in the past? Since when did she have such a deep scheming heart? Xiaolian raised her head and looked over, only to see Hellion Vivian looking at her with a faint smile. However, there wasn't the slightest trace of a smile in those eyes. Suddenly, she seemed to have understood something, and an unprecedented fear flashed through the depths of her eyes. No, it couldn't be. She couldn't possibly be that smart. But the things she did made it so that she couldn't help but think in that direction. Since this woman had asked the little monk to consecrate these accessories, why didn't she just directly ask the little monk to identify these accessories, instead of calling her over first? Only after she had lied according to Madame's instructions did that woman say that she had actually already asked someone to consecrate these accessories. Was she overthinking things? Why did she feel that all of this was a deliberate trap set up by Hellion Vivian? It was all for the sake of beating them at their own game and dragging them all in. Otherwise, Hellion Vivian could have called the little monk out to prove her innocence at the start. She wouldn't have had to make such an unnecessary move like this. When Xiaolian thought of this, her entire body inexplicably shuddered. She looked at Hellion Vivian with a trembling body, as if she was looking at a demon. However, Chen Wen, who hadn't experienced this kind of scheming, still hadn't seen through the situation. She only glanced in Hazy's direction, her white teeth tightly biting her red lips. Young master's saying this, isn't it too early to come to a conclusion? The little monk said that he consecrated Wei Wei Mai Mai, but who saw it? That pitiful servant girl even said that she sent over something else. There's no one to prove it, so how can you say that it was the servant girl who lied and not someone else who deceived her? Hazy still didn't speak. That little monk got angry, saying with a red face and thick neck, "Benefactress, monks don't lie. I'm a Buddhist disciple, and I disdain lying to deceive others. If you don't believe me, you can have head abbot Fang Zhong smell it. As long as an object has been consecrated, it will leave behind a sandalwood fragrance for an entire night." Ha ha ha, this old monk's disciple is right. Head abbot Fang Zhong laughed heartily. He directly leaned over and picked up one of the jade bracelets, placing it under his nose and smelling it. It's indeed been consecrated. The little monk heavily snorted at Chen Wen, as if saying, "You can slander me, but you can't slander my character as a monk. Monks don't lie." After seeing this scene, everyone turned silent. Their gazes couldn't help but turn towards Xiaolian. After a servant girl delivered the accessories, she actually lied. Everyone wasn't a fool, and naturally guessed that this matter wasn't so simple. Their gazes towards the Hellion Jiao also carried guesses. How could Hellion Jiao endure this kind of gaze? With a pa sound, she slapped little Lian's face with the back of her hand, as if she hated iron for not becoming steel. Her thin lips slightly trembled. "Mother and I trusted you so much. How could you speak without thinking?" That slap was much more ruthless than the one that the Hellion Vivian had given her. When the Hellion Vivian had slapped her, she hadn't thought of slapping her until she couldn't speak anymore. After all, this play had no meaning without Xiaolian. The Hellion Jiao, on the other hand, slapped her, bringing along a buzzing sound of martial qi. Xiaolian's entire face was swollen, blood seeping out from the corner of her mouth. Not to mention opening her mouth to speak, even maintaining a kneeling position was a bit difficult. She also didn't dare to say anything, only continuously kowtowing, begging the Emperor Emeritus for forgiveness. It was this servant who let Miss and Madam down. It's just that eldest Miss's usual arrogance is too great. This servant couldn't bear to see it, and thus lied. The Hellion Vivian calmly listened, her thin lips indifferently hooking up. Was she trying to separate Madame Su from the Hellion Jiao? Chapter 188. How could it be that easy? She had said before that she, Hellion Vivian, was someone who would not offend others unless they offended her. If they offended her, she would eliminate them completely. If they wanted to scheme against her, since they were already here, then they shouldn't think of leaving so easily. Hellion Vivian played with the jade bracelet in her hand, her tone indifferent. You have indeed let down your miss and madam. Xiaolian lowered her eyes and didn't say anything else. She understood better than anyone that in this current situation, as long as she could protect madam and miss, the Emperor Emeritus would only treat her as a mere servant girl who told a lie and deal with her. However, if madam and the rest were implicated, then it wouldn't just be a matter of lying. It would be a well-planned crime of deceiving the Emperor. Thus, when she heard Hellion Vivian's words, she secretly sighed in relief, thinking that this matter would end like this. Who would have thought that Hellion Vivian's next words would be, because you didn't do a single thing that they entrusted you with. You even let me have a handle on you. If this isn't letting them down, then what is? Xiaolian's body shook heavily, then she raised her eyes. The matter of lying was all my own idea. It has nothing to do with Miss and Madam. They also didn't instruct me to do anything. You're quite loyal, knowing how to protect your master. Hellion Vivian indifferently smiled. It's just that the person you're protecting doesn't seem to think that way. Otherwise, she wouldn't have used her martial chi when she slapped you. It's obvious that she's anxious to silence you. As she spoke, she looked towards the Hellion Jiaowa. Don't you think so, younger sister? The Hellion Jiaowa clenched her hands, but her expression didn't change in the slightest. If Xiaolian's plan didn't work, then there was still Chen Wenwan's plan. Chen Wen admired He Ziyi, and the reason why the Chen family could come to the capital was because of their Su family. Long before they entered the temple, her mother had already planned everything. They never thought that Hellion Vivian would really get on that carriage. It was only for the sake of giving Chen Wen a chance to get close to Hellion Vivian. Now that the witchwood they planned was on the ground, no matter how many links there were, as long as this was there, Hellion Vivian would definitely die. Thinking to this point, the Hellion Jiaowa sensibly took a step forward, her voice gentle and magnanimous. When a servant made a mistake, of course, it's natural to punish them. Eldest sister suspecting me and mother, it's fine. But, the main point of this matter, eldest sister, why you brought the witchwood, this kind of witchwood. What Miss Jiaowa says is correct. After such a ruckus, Chen Wenwan's jealousy towards Hellion Vivian grew even more. However, she concealed it very well, so much so that there was even a trace of trembling in her voice, as if she still had lingering fears from what she had just seen. Facing retired emperor, she said, retired emperor's trip this time was for the sake of praying for rain and blessing for the wastelands of the northern desert. Only then did you come to Hidden Spirit Temple to bathe, burn incense, and eat vegetarian food for a day, all for the sake of displaying your sincerity. However, there was someone who brought witchwood along, ready to harm people at any moment. This kind of insidious method, not only did it ruin retired emperor's sincerity, it also ruined the fortune of the wastelands of the northern desert. As she spoke, she looked towards Hellion Vivian. Although Wenwan's family background is low, I have to say this. Miss Weiwei wants to rely on a servant girl to divert everyone's attention, but it's completely useless. This witchwood harms people. There's no way Miss Weiwei doesn't know. Then why do you still carry it along with you? Hellion Vivian cast a sidelong glance towards Chen Wen. I don't know how I've offended Miss Chen, to make Miss Chen be so overbearing towards me. Before entering the temple, Miss Chen still called me younger sister, younger sister. After entering the temple, you can't wait to see if I'm that wicked beyond redemption person. Then shouldn't I be suspicious of Miss Chen's original purpose for approaching me? Miss Hellion, you actually look at me like this. Chen Wenwan's eyes shook, as if there was a glimmer of water swirling within. Outside the temple, I saw that you met with difficulties, so I let you enter my carriage. Now, Miss Hellion unexpectedly said that I had an ulterior motive. As she spoke, she tilted her head and used the handkerchief in her hand to wipe the corners of her eyes, appearing extremely wronged. Hellion Jiaowa shook her head and looked towards Hellion Vivian with condemnation in her eyes. Eldest sister, I really don't understand how the current you became like this. We helped you, yet you feel that we have an ulterior motive. You're jealous of us in your heart, so you brought those things that can't be brought to the table. Eldest sister, you don't know how much this younger sister's heart hurts seeing you like this. The thing on the ground hasn't been picked up yet you and Miss Chen insist that it's witchwood. Hellion Vivian smiled, traces of coldness entering her eyes. You're really a good younger sister. I've never seen a younger sister who's so eager for her older sister to die. As she spoke, Hellion Vivian bent down and picked up that piece of witch wood that was still hidden in the yellow cloth bag. She lightly pushed it up, and that piece of witch wood was completely exposed. This is the witch wood that you keep on talking about. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled. I'll have to ask Eunuch Sun to step forward and see whether or not this is an evil thing that harms people. Hellion Jiawa was the closest to Hellion Vivian. Now that she clearly saw the words engraved on that piece of sandalwood, her expression suddenly changed greatly, and all of a sudden, she was somewhat flustered. Eunuch Sun also stared blankly. What kind of witch wood was wrapped in that yellow cloth? There wasn't cinnabar, there wasn't the 8 characters of birth, and there wasn't even any witchcraft. On the wood, there was a set of words quietly engraved. The momentum was ingenious, the shape was dense, the strength was good, and the spirit was calm and refined. Each word was very scribbled, yet it also penetrated deep into the bone. The country is prosperous and the people are at peace. 4 simple words, yet it made Eunuch Sun take another look at Hellion Vivian. Nowadays, there were very few women in the world who could have such a breadth of mind. He couldn't help but smile. Miss Hellion can be this magnanimous, truly makes this old servant admire you. If this old servant's guess isn't wrong, this ought to be the hidden spirit temple's incense wood. It's been exposed to the smell of incense all year round, and can concentrate and nourish the eyes. Only, I don't know how Miss Hellion obtained this piece of incense wood. Once Eunuch Sun's voice fell, the people present were in an uproar. Wasn't it witch wood? How did it become incense wood? Incense wood. Chen Wen was even more shocked. Turning her head to look, her lips were pale and somewhat trembling. How was this possible? That yellow cloth was clearly something she handed over to Hellion Vivian. Inside that cloth was witchwood engraved with curse words. How could it become incense wood? Eunuch Sun, could it be that you saw wrongly? Chen Wen panicked, anxiously wanting to take a step forward to take a closer look. Hellion Vivian's body moved to the side, blocking in front of her. Her lips curved into a light smile. Miss Chen, how much do you hope that this is a piece of witch wood? So much so that you don't even believe Eunuch Sun's words. Hellion Vivian. Chen Wen took a deep breath. Don't speak nonsense. I'm only afraid that Eunuch Sun's eyes were blurred for a moment and made a mistake, letting the wicked go. Chapter 189. She bit her lip, still wanting to say something. But then she heard a deep and indifferent voice, languid and extremely sexy. You don't believe in Eunuch Sun's eyesight, but what about this highness? Beligaju walked out from the deep shadows. His elegant figure appeared exceptionally handsome under the contrast of the fur cloak. His eyebrows and eyelashes were deep, his black eyes were deep, and his temperament was outstanding, so cold that it made people terrified. Chen Wenwan's entire body trembled, her legs were so weak that she wanted to kneel on the ground. Seeing this, the Emperor Emeritus wrinkled his brows, his expression also becoming cold. Bring the thing over. Yes. Eunuch Sun raised his hands high, presenting the incense wood. When he saw the words engraved on the incense wood, the Emperor Emeritus's eyes flashed. He turned his head to look at Hellion Vivian. This is. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Wei Wei said that she worships Emperor Emeritus very much. During this time of drought, you personally went up the mountain to pray for blessings. Wei Wei admires your concern for the country and the people. A commoner woman is light and weak, so there's not much to do. I only heard that the incense wood in this hidden spirit temple will grant one's wishes, so I had the little monk bring me to a side courtyard to ask for one. The little monk stood beside Hellion Vivian and nodded his head heavily. He chanted Amitabha before saying, Benefactress walked all the way here, going up 199 steps and kowtowed a total of 990 times. With such sincerity, Buddha will definitely bless you with good news. Holding the incense wood in his hand, the Emperor Emeritus felt as if he had been slapped in the face. After a moment of silence, he turned to look at Hellion Vivian. For the first time, his usually calm eyes carried an apologetic expression. Good child, you're very considerate. Having heard what was said, Helian Jiao's complexion became exceptionally unsightly. She abruptly clenched both of her hands, then slowly released them again. She suddenly realized that no matter if it was her, little Lian, or Chen Wen, they'd all been duped by Wei Wei. Before they entered the temple, Helian Vivian had expected everything. She had held back, not because she was flustered, but because she was waiting for them to walk right into her trap. At this moment, the Helian Jiao regretted to the extreme. The woman in front of her was really different from before. Not only was her martial qi different, but she was also scheming. Originally, she wanted to frame her in front of the Emperor Emeritus so that she could completely infuriate the Emperor Emeritus and never have the chance to make a comeback. Now, she had unintentionally paved the way for that woman. After such an incident, the Emperor Emeritus would definitely feel guilty towards Helian Vivian. In the future, he might even take care of her. Thinking of this, the Helian Jiao's heart was filled with hatred. She forcefully bit through the thin flesh in her mouth. Her mouth was full of blood, but she had no choice but to swallow it down. Helian Vivian looked at her and smiled faintly. Now that I've proven my innocence, I have something I want to ask little sister and Miss Chen. I clearly have a piece of incense wood on me, so why did you say it was witchwood without even looking at it? What is the reason for this? Chen Wenwan's thin and colorless lips couldn't say a single word. Helian Jiao forced a smile. From a distance, that incense would look similar to witchwood. That's why little sister thought. Little sister. Helian Vivian calmly interrupted her words. You want to tell me that this is all a misunderstanding? Helian Jiao nodded, the rims of her eyes slightly red. I've wronged big sister. We really did see wrongly. Saw wrongly? I think it's little sister who doesn't understand why the witchwood you put on me would turn into a piece of incense wood, right? After Helian Vivian said this, she turned to look at the Emperor Emeritus. I won't hide it from the Emperor Emeritus. I really do have a piece of witchwood here. What? Everyone looked at each other in dismay. They really didn't understand why this Helian Vivian, who had just removed herself from the rumors of the witchwood, would personally admit that she had a piece of witchwood. However, only Chen Wen realized what she was going to say, and her entire person stood up. Helian Vivian lightly swept a glance at her and continued, only, this piece of witchwood was given to me by Miss Chen before entering the temple. Helian Vivian, don't make slanderous accusations. Chen Wen furiously roared. That kind of twisted little face didn't have the slightest bit of gentleness from before. Helian Vivian smiled, her eyes shining as if they were covered with a layer of dazzling light. Miss Chen, the ones making slanderous accusations from start to finish were you guys. Why do you think I wanted to cooperate with you and get on your carriage? I just wanted to see what kind of tricks you were going to play. I really didn't expect that Madame Su, in order to deal with me, would actually send a young miss from an aristocratic family. Miss Chen, you're not a student from White Academy who's participating in this year's exam, yet you appeared in the entourage. Presumably, only the Su family, who can cover the sky with one hand in the imperial court, can help you do this. Only, you've underestimated me too much. You want to kill me with just a piece of witchwood. You really think I, Helian Vivian, am still that year when I let you bully me, the orphan child who can't speak? As she spoke, Helian Vivian took a step forward and heavily kneeled on the ground. Her voice was louder than Helian Vivian's kneeling, and more solid. The instant her long skirt fell to the ground, it practically stirred up the water on the ground. The drizzle drizzled, and the evening wind gusted. Helian Vivian raised her head, her long sleeves fluttering in the wind. Retired Emperor, that year, my grandfather was 60 years old. In order to protect the Dragon War Empire's territory, he overturned the border with his army and dyed the mountains with blood. He brandished a war blade and spread the spirit of war. Therefore, you conferred my Helian bloodline as the Defense Department, meaning to protect the family for the country and wholeheartedly serve the people. But unfortunately, I've been a good-for-nothing since childhood. I don't have a grandfather, nor do I have a mother. Even the position of the head of the family was given to someone else. Therefore, I deserve to be bullied and humiliated, cursed as a barbaric profligate. After all, I lost my own family business. As Helian Vivian spoke, her back was very straight. Although she was in a kneeling position, She gave everyone a kind of indescribable handsomeness. But now that I've grown up, I understand what honor and disgrace are. I don't want to let people smear my reputation like this, and not say anything. I think that year, when my grandfather brandished his blade to protect the family and the country, it wasn't for the day that I would stand here and be schemed against for no reason. When I was young, he would hold me in his arms. The sentence he said the most was, Yarrow when you grow up, you must become a top-notch martial chi master and follow by retired emperor's side. Only this way can you protect my Dragon War empire and ensure the prosperity of the people. All these years, no matter what happened, I've always remembered these words. I thought that when I reached a certain height, I would tell you these words. But now, it seems that you may not want to hear them. After all, the current head of the Defense Department is also surnamed Su. Retired Emperor, you also have misgivings. Retired Emperor looked at the small face before his eyes that was somewhat similar to Old Man Halien's. His heart received a huge shock. He suddenly realized that previously, he wasn't willing to let his grandson marry this child. Was he really wrong? Chapter 190. He had watched that girl of the Hellion family grow up since she was a child. How could that girl's daughter be as unbearable as the rumors? It was because he had been in this position for a long time. He had heard a lot and thought a lot. He considered himself to be a wise ruler who empathized with his old generals. He had never mistreated any of the generals who had fought alongside him in the past. But today, he discovered that he had actually let the granddaughter of his greatest hero suffer endless grievances. Thinking about what happened just now, the retired emperor's heart was in turmoil. If it wasn't for this child's actions, he might not have done anything to the Su family in the end. Su family, Su family. The retired emperor took a deep breath and slammed the prayer beads he was fiddling with onto the table. Even his tone was filled with anger. Go and call Susha over for this emperor. Yes. As Eunuch Sun's voice fell, Hellion Jiawa was like a frosted eggplant. She took a step back in a daze. When Eunuch Sun brought Madame Su over, Madame Su saw her personal maid kneeling on the ground from afar. Her heart immediately turned cold. Originally, Madame Su thought that Hellion Vivian was just a little girl and wouldn't be difficult to deal with, so she sent one of her maids to do it. Everything should have been flawless, so why was Xiaolian the one kneeling on the ground? Something must have gone wrong. The intelligent Madame Su used a few seconds to scan the faces of her beloved daughter and Chen Wan. However, in an instant, she understood what was going on. Her first instinct was to minimize the problem. This was because this matter could be explained by the younger generation as messing around. If she was also involved, the nature of the matter would be different. Therefore, even if it was a pity, some chess pieces could only be discarded. Madame Su tightened her grip on the handkerchief in her palm, but she didn't lose her composure on the surface. She lowered her body and bowed. This subject woman pays respect to retired emperor, may this subject woman pay respect to you. The retired emperor did not ask her to get up. He just looked at her condescendingly and said in an indifferent tone, this emperor remembers that Minister Chen, who just entered the capital recently, was promoted by your Su family. As a woman, I am not clear about the matters of the previous dynasty. Su Yang Mo tightened her grip on her handkerchief to make herself look normal. Brother never talks about these things. The retired emperor narrowed his eyes. Then you don't know this Miss Chen in front of you? I've never seen him before. It was true that Su Yang Mo had never met Chen Wan before. It was a big deal for the ministers to form cliques for personal gain. If the womenfolk were too close, it would also raise suspicions. Furthermore, her brother had just promoted the one with the surname Chen. Even if she used the Chen family, it was only through letters and had never met. If it wasn't for that little vile spawn tossing and turning around in the White Academy too fiercely this time, causing Jiawa to lose face again and again, she wouldn't have used this chess piece buried in the White Academy in advance. The retired emperor looked at Su Yang Mo's expression and knew that it would be a dead end if he continued to ask, so he simply smiled and said, then you don't know that your beloved daughter Hellion Jiawa colluded with Miss Chen to harm others? There's actually such a thing. Su Yang Mo's eyes shook. She looked at Hellion Jiawa in disbelief. Jiawa, who did you harm? What did I tell you on a daily basis? Your naivety will inevitably be used by others. What happened this time? If Hellion Vivian didn't know what kind of person Madame Su was, she was afraid that she would also be deceived by her acting skills. Compared to Hellion Jiaoa, her mother was the one who had really practiced the skill of being shameless to the extreme. Madame Su. Hellion Vivian slowly walked towards her, the corners of her mouth carrying a smile, her aura oppressing people. I once read a book. That book wrote like this: if a person is really surprised, their facial expression can at most maintain it for 2 seconds. If it exceeds 2 seconds, it proves that this person is not really surprised, but is just pretending. Madam, I've calculated the time. I'm afraid that you've maintained this expression for at least 5 seconds. Su Yangmo did not expect that the little girl who used to be so timid when she saw her would suddenly become so domineering. Thinking about the news she had received these days, she narrowed her eyes slightly and put on her usual attitude. Wei, is this how you talk to the mistress of the household? Is this all you've learned in the White Academy? How dare you offend your elders? Hellion Vivian laughed. Elders? Madam has probably forgotten, but I've long been incited by your precious daughter to remove my name from the Hellion family. Now, I, Hellion Wei, am all alone. Other than my master, those who can be considered my elders are all in the tombs deep in the mountains. Perhaps Madam wants to go down and accompany them. If that's the case, I can consider calling you my elder. You. Madame Su took a deep breath. You've really changed too quickly. You've almost made me, your mother, unable to recognize you. Hellion Vivian looked at her, the light in her eyes like ice blossoming. Madam, do you need me to remind you that my mother, who used to treat you like a sister, had her husband stolen and her reputation ruined by you? That's why she fell ill for a long time and left this world. Before she died, you kept spreading rumors that she couldn't tolerate you. Now it seems that your beloved daughter really takes after your temperament. She doesn't know how to do other things, but she's proficient in slandering and framing people. When everyone heard this, they couldn't help but look at Madame Su, especially the remaining 2 or 3 noble young ladies. They still didn't know that there was such a thing in the capital. That incomparably noble martial Qi genius, the mother of the second Miss Hellion, unexpectedly relied on this kind of method to climb up the ranks. To tell the truth, this kind of method was the most shameful thing for them. Although in this circle of Suzhou City, everyone wanted to marry a good husband, but they were absolutely unwilling to do this kind of thing like stealing their own sister's husband. They really couldn't see that Madame Su was like this in the past. What Su Yangmo didn't want people to mention the most was those things in the past. Unfortunately, Hellion Vivian's every word was exposing her shortcomings. Su Yangmo couldn't wait to tear Hellion Vivian apart right now, but she couldn't do it in front of everyone. In addition, she didn't know the details of what happened here before she came, so she could only silently endure it. She turned her head to face the retired emperor and said, "Retired emperor, I know that daughter of mine. Her temperament is very weak. Could there be some kind of misunderstanding?" Misunderstanding? The retired emperor's eyes were calm and his tone was low. Your daughter instigated Miss Chen to bring the witch wood into the temple in order to frame others. Your personal maid is kneeling here. What kind of misunderstanding do you think there could be? Not only are you full of lies, but you also frame others. Su Yangmo, is this how your Su family teaches people? Chapter 191. Su Yangmo didn't think that the retired emperor would be so angry. She represented the Su and He families. Even if this matter was exposed, the retired emperor would control the influence of this matter to a certain extent in order to balance the court and restrain his relatives. However, today, the retired emperor obviously wanted to punish severely. This caught Su Yangmo completely unprepared. She didn't know what Wei actually did to make the retired emperor, who always knew how to weigh the pros and cons, make such a raging decision. She could only kneel on the ground and complain about her injustice. Retired emperor, I wasn't here just now. I also don't know why Xiao Lian is kneeling here. As for what retired emperor said about framing others, I don't understand at all. Good, very good. The retired emperor stood up and said, since you don't understand anything, Then go back and tell Prime Minister Su that I want to keep a low profile on this trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple. That's why I let him handle the preparations. It seems that I've given some people convenience that they shouldn't have. In the future, he doesn't need to care about the affairs of Minghuang Palace. Just be his Prime Minister. These words didn't have any deterrent force. However, Su Yangmo understood that this kind of decision was to weaken the Su family's power. Her heart thumped loudly. She raised her eyes and looked at her beloved daughter, whose face was pale. No matter how unwilling she was, this was the result. She had to think of a way to protect Jiao. One had to know that her future was limitless. She couldn't fall in this kind of internal strife between women. Thinking of this, Madame Su kowtowed heavily and said to the Emperor Emeritus, "Emperor Emeritus, this subject knows that you are angry because of this incident, but who saw this subject's daughter instructing people? What evidence do you have?" As she spoke, Madame Su looked at Chen Wen. "Miss Chen, my Su family has no enmity with you. We're not close. You did something wrong. Why did the retired emperor say that you were instructed by my daughter?" Hearing this, Chen Wen trembled. How could she not understand that Madame Su was giving her a warning? She wanted her to judge the situation before speaking. For such a long time, the Chen family was able to climb to this point because of the Su family. Mrs. Su's meaning was obvious. Since the Su family could make the Chen family prosper, they could also ruin the Chen family. Chen Wen laughed out loud. Suddenly, her eyes sunk, and her voice contained pain. "This matter was all done by me alone, without anyone's instructions. She's only an ugly woman, without the slightest bit of beauty, yet she still hooks up with this and that all day long. She didn't even let young Master He off. Truly disgusting to the extreme. If I don't give this kind of person some face to see, my heart won't be at ease. It's just that I underestimated some people's thoughts. On the surface, they accepted my good intentions and were intimate with me, but in reality, they were always thinking of how to guard against me. In the end, I'm too naive. You can kill me or cut me up as you wish. You used the witchwood because you were jealous." Madame Su came to a sudden realization, and her eyes swept over He eyes intentionally or unintentionally. "So the one you like is the second son of the He family." He Zed's expression did not change as he watched this scene. His eyes were cold. In that instant, Chen Wen lowered her head even more. She blankly looked at the wet bluestone path in front of her. As early as when she first entered the capital, she already liked that young Master He who could handle any situation with ease no matter what. She knew better than anyone that the woman he would marry in the future, if not a noble family, then she would be a princess. Her birth, her family background, she was definitely a match for him. Madame Su saw through her thoughts at that tea party. She said that recently, Master He was anxious to find a wife for that person. As long as she succeeded in this matter, not only would her father's official career become better and better, she would also be able to enter the He Manor as she wished. But this trip to Hidden Spirit Temple, she discovered that no matter how high she climbed, that person would not have her shadow in his eyes. Based on what? If she lost to someone else, then forget it. An ugly woman who was banished from the family, without power or influence, and even that face was enough to turn people off, was able to make that person treat her so differently. She couldn't accept it. She thought that as long as she got rid of this ugly woman, she would have a chance. But she didn't expect that everything was just a dream. Now, she woke up from her beautiful dream. He simply couldn't remember the young girl he supported at the tea party. Now, when he looked at her, the disgust in his eyes made her wish that nothing had ever happened. Chen Wen had never regretted it as much as she did now. She trembled as she waited for the retired emperor's fury. Madame Su was very satisfied with this Chen Wenwan's understanding of the big picture. She raised her head and said to the retired emperor, "Retired emperor, now the matter is already very clear. It was only jealousy between children that caused this Chen family's young miss to do such a disgraceful thing." The retired emperor didn't speak, but lowered his gaze. Hellion Vivian smiled. She never thought that this matter would completely drag down Madame Su. If it was that simple, she wouldn't have established profound heavens. She understood Madame Su's scheming more than anyone else, as well as the Su family's position in the imperial court. Even if the instigator was Madame Su, Chen Wen still wouldn't expose her. This was a very obvious matter. Because in the Dragon War Empire, the four great clans' power was expanding. This made Chen Wen worried that after she told the truth, the Chen family would be exterminated. Madame Su was indeed smart and knew how to use power to oppress people. But what she didn't understand was that it was precisely because of this point that it made the retired emperor even more brooding. How could the retired emperor allow a power that was faintly beginning to suppress the imperial family? And what Hellion Vivian wanted was precisely this result. In the future, if she wanted to take back the Hellion family, she would have to face the four great clans. Just based on her own power, how could it be enough? She had to drag the retired emperor over as well. Hellion Vivian raised her head. When she met the retired emperor's scrutinizing eyes, she suddenly stared blankly. She seemed to have understood something in her heart. She actually forgot that if she did this kind of thing, the retired emperor would very likely perceive her purpose. As the saying goes, this monarch's experience was more than the salt they ate. How could he not see the twists and turns in this matter? But what made her puzzled was the retired emperor's attitude towards this matter. The retired emperor looked at that dark little face that revealed a blank expression. He felt that it was a bit like that little seventh grandson of his. His heart also softened, thinking that in any case, he wouldn't be able to persuade that ice-cold grandson who kept his word. Since he started speaking just now, that ice-cold youngster had been standing by his side, sneering from time to time. It was obvious that he wasn't happy. He was already so old. Basically, everything he did was for the younger generation. Since that precious grandson of his had a choice, no matter what his purpose was, he would just follow his wishes. Right now, he actually had a bit of hope that that ice-cold youngster sincerely wanted to marry this girl, and not for other reasons. Chapter 192. In the past, when he saw this girl, he had a very bad impression of her. It was probably because all women were like this, they only had feelings in their hearts. At that time, this girl's heart was hung up on that marriage agreement with the Murong family. Everything she did was a joke. Seeing her today, the retired emperor felt as if he had just met this girl. She advanced step by step without panic. Most importantly, even though she was young, she actually knew how to weigh the pros and cons. Most importantly, she was affectionate and righteous. If Old Third married her in the future, he would also live a happy life. The retired emperor had also thought about who would be suitable to spend the rest of his life with his grandson, who had a temperament as cold as ice. After thinking about it, there were many with good family backgrounds. Perhaps he wanted to warm up his heart, but there really weren't any. For so many years, the retired emperor had always been worried that Beligaju would go astray and become a tyrant. After all, that kind of temperament was unfathomable. It was indeed suitable to be an emperor, but it was too cold. It was as if the people in this world were not important to him. Everyone said that to be an emperor, one didn't need feelings. Yes, if an emperor had feelings, he would have ties. However, that didn't mean that he had to be an extremely cold-blooded emperor who monopolized the world. If that was the case, the ones who would suffer would be the common people. The cold brat needed such a person who could soften him up occasionally. This kind of person couldn't just rely on naivety and innocence. In the imperial palace and the imperial court, there were too many temptations. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause one to fall into a trap. This girl had to be firm but not hard, strong but not barbaric. She had to have her own perseverance to not be easily swallowed up. Until now, he had only found this sign in this girl. When the retired emperor thought of this, his expression relaxed a lot when he looked at Hellion Vivian. This made Hellion Vivian somewhat at a loss. Then, she inexplicably touched the bridge of her nose. What did the retired emperor's inexplicable satisfied gaze mean? It had to be said that Hellion Vivian had a pair of eyes that people naturally liked. Although her face was a little dark, her eyes were very dazzling when she was smart, and very cute when she was in a daze. The more the retired emperor looked, the more satisfied he became. In his heart, He had already classified Hellion Vivian as simple, honest, and intelligent. Withdrawing his gaze, he placed it on Chen Wenwan's body. This emperor will ask you one last question. Is everything you said true? Yes. Chen Wen bit her lip. She knew that her momentum was already lost. Kneeling on the ground, she didn't even raise her eyes. These matters were all done by this humble girl alone. It has nothing to do with anyone else. The retired emperor's expression was indifferent. Someone come, take her away for this emperor and put her in prison. She will be dealt with when we return to the capital. Yes. The secret guard accepted the order. The retired emperor continued, write a letter to the emperor. Remove Chen Hui's crown and send his entire family back to their original place. Within 7 years, they are not allowed to enter the court. When Chen Wan, whose eyes had originally darkened, heard these words, she suddenly turned her head. Retired emperor, what does this have to do with father? You want to deal with him. How did your father get to this position? When the retired emperor said these words, his gaze swept past Madame Su's back inch by inch. This emperor knows in his heart. Your father also knows in his heart. Chen Wan stiffened. Her gaze wavered as she looked at Su Yangmo. She clearly wanted her to plead for leniency on behalf of the Chen family. Su Yangmo didn't say anything. She didn't even look at Chen Wan. She maintained her original position without blinking. In that instant, Chen Wan struggled and wanted to shout something. However, she discovered that her throat unexpectedly made a sound. How could this be? Chen Wan struggled to move forward. Recalling that she had just been in contact with Madame Su, she suddenly understood something. That small face twisted to the extreme, as if she couldn't wait to chew up Madame Su and swallow her whole. She actually believed that as long as she didn't give her away, she would protect the Chen family. She didn't expect that from the beginning. What this vicious woman wanted to do was to silence her. Chen Wan felt her entire body's meridians ache. She couldn't even cry out for injustice before she was taken away by the secret guard. Su Yangmo saw that the only person who could possibly threaten her had become a death warrant. Her thumping heart could be considered to have settled down. When she looked at the retired emperor again, she also relaxed quite a bit. Retired emperor is brilliant. She didn't expect that the retired emperor would only look at her indifferently. His bearing didn't diminish. As for the Hellion Jiawa, as a student of the superior compound, her conduct is not upright. Indiscriminately, she slandered others. Tomorrow, let her stay in this hidden spirit temple's firewood shed to properly reflect on where she was wrong. When she finally understands, then she can return to the capital. Hearing this, the Hellion Jiawa trembled from head to toe. Abruptly, she turned to look at Madame Su. She couldn't stay here. This was a temple. She was a young girl who had yet to be betrothed. If word got out that she was staying here, what would happen? Would there still be anyone who would marry her in the future? What's more, when would she have thought it through? The martial Qi competition was about to begin. The winner would become the third princess consort. This was something that the retired emperor had promised her in front of everyone. His words were golden and couldn't be changed. She was the one who wanted to win the championship. If she was trapped here, how could she participate in the competition? The Hellion Jiawa panicked. Her pair of limpid eyes were filled with uneasiness. She looked at Hellion Vivian with an unprecedented malevolence. It was all because of this cheap woman. If it weren't for her, the retired emperor wouldn't have made such a decision. The retired emperor had always praised her. He even revealed that he wanted to make her the third princess consort. Now, all of this was ruined by this cheap woman. The Hellion Jiawa bit the tender meat in her mouth. Her fingertips were imprinted into the palm of her hand. Madame Su was afraid that her beloved daughter wouldn't be able to bear it. She reached out and pressed down on her arm. Suppressing her sullenness, she said, "What the retired emperor said is right." This time, she was too insensible. She was warm-hearted, but she didn't expect to fall into someone else's trap. I ask that the retired emperor consider my brother and the Defense Division residents and punish her lightly. The martial Qi competition will be held soon. The elders have already chosen Jiawa to represent our Dragon War Empire. I ask that the retired emperor carefully reconsider. When Hellion Vivian heard this, she couldn't help but admire Madame Su's intelligence. If she had used other things to pressure the retired emperor might have punished the Hellion Jiawa even more severely. But if it was the empire's honor, even the retired emperor must consider the overall situation and reduce the punishment for the Hellion Jiawa. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain himself in front of the common people. Sure enough, the retired emperor's long eyebrows wrinkled. It wasn't difficult to see that he was enduring silently. Madame Su knew that she had made the right bet. The corners of her mouth curved up. Just as she was about to smile, she heard a sentence from the flat bottom. Since it's like this, then let the madam take the place of her beloved daughter to receive the punishment. Chapter 193. Two voices sounded at the same time. One was Hellion Vivian, languid and indolent, with a smile on her lips. The other one was Bailey Jiaoju. He was tilting his head. His silver face was as perfect as an ice sculpture. He slowly rolled up his sleeves. The corners of his mouth curved into a devilishly cold smile. His voice was low and sexy, but it also carried the indifference of indifference to the world. Hellion Vivian didn't expect that the royal family would have the same thoughts as her, turning her eyes to the side to look at the man. The third prince, however, had an indifferent appearance, only raising his eyebrows at her. Head Abbot Fang Zhong glared. What did he say? This girl was just a little similar to this stinking brat. Look, all of the methods that were mentioned were exactly the same. It was shocking. The retired emperor was also stunned, then laughed. Then we'll do as Hellion Vivian said, let Madame Su take the blame. The retired emperor is wise. Hellion Vivian looked back and saluted without being surprised by honor or disgrace. Su Yang Mo's grip on the Hellion Jiawa tightened, her eyes filled with hatred. Making her, a first-rank madam, stay in the temple to abstain from meat and recite Buddha, if this wasn't extraordinary shame and humiliation, what was? She forced herself to calm down, looked towards the retired emperor, and was just about to speak. Hellion Vivian interrupted her. Madame Su, don't tell me you also have a test to compete in? Su Yang Mo breathed slowly, the corners of her mouth stiff. No. Was this little vile spawn deliberately using her words just now to block her? She was already so old, how could there be a test to compete in? Hellion Vivian acted as if she didn't see Madame Su's anger, her voice indifferent. Since that's the case, the mother should repay the child's debt, nothing could be more suitable. Hellion Jiawa was so angry that her teeth were itching. She really wanted to raise all the martial qi in her body, directly rush over and slaughter Hellion Vivian. But on the surface, she only held Madame Su's hand, shaking her head back and forth. How can I let my mother take the blame for me? The one at fault is clearly me. Both her eyes were red, her eyelashes drooping, stained with a layer of moisture, unexpectedly giving people the feeling that they couldn't bear to look at her. Hellion Vivian knew that Hellion Jiawa was acting again. However, as matters stood, no matter how she acted, she couldn't hide the fact that she harbored evil intentions. Everybody wasn't a fool. Through this matter, they more or less knew that Hellion Jiawa wasn't as magnanimous and naive as she appeared on the surface. Of course, some people would still be mesmerized by her appearance, especially those young masters of aristocratic families who loved beauties to the extreme. Wei straightened her collar, tilted her head and smiled. Then younger sister's meaning is that you want to stay in the temple by yourself. This kind of filial piety is indeed touching. Hellion Jiawa was choked by Hellion Wei until her complexion changed. She bit her lips until they were bright red. She angrily clenched her teeth. How could she possibly mean that? What she thought was that if she cried a bit, maybe there would be someone who would help her and her mother plead for leniency. After all, the people standing here were all young masters from influential families in the capital. There were quite a few people who were on good terms with the Su family. If they opened their mouths, retired emperor would have to think a bit more. But before anyone could say anything, this bitch blocked all of her escape routes. This time, she really didn't know what to do. Hellion Jiawa clenched her hands, looking at Su Yang Mo at a loss. Mother. Su Yang Mo closed her eyes tightly, and when she opened them again, She weighed the pros and cons. Her daughter was highly valued by the 4 great families. She would definitely be rich in the future. If she was punished today, she was afraid that she would never be able to wash away the humiliation in this lifetime. Moreover, she was already a married woman. Even if she lost face, it would be like needles piercing her flesh every time she went out in the future. But that was only a small matter. As long as the Su family was strong enough, no one would dare to talk about it in front of her. Just like how she dealt with that bitch Hellion in the past. Therefore, Su Yangmo chose to protect her beloved daughter in the end. She lowered her eyes slightly, hinting at something. Jiao has grown up to be like this. It's all because I, as her mother, didn't tell her that people are unpredictable. If Madame Su still refuses to forgive her, then let me take her place to suffer. On the surface, it seemed like she was admitting her mistake, but if someone who didn't understand the situation heard it, they would think that Hellion Vivian was not magnanimous enough and insisted on punishing Hellion Jiao. Hellion Vivian laughed coldly. Her eyes met Su Yangmo's face, pausing after each word. Madam, I think you must have misunderstood the situation. Now it's not that people are unpredictable, it's that Madame Su is immoral and wants to frame others. Madam, are you saying that the retired emperor's judgment is unfair? Of course not. Su Yangmo's fingers stiffened as she looked at the gaze that retired emperor cast towards her. She was afraid that she'd said something wrong and let retired emperor find an excuse to heavily punish Hellion Jiao. Helpless, in order to protect her beloved daughter as much as possible, she could only soften her attitude in front of Wei Wei. What I want to say is that you can blame me, and you can also blame your second sister for doing something wrong this time. However, we still treat you as one of our own. After saying that, Su Yangmo only felt that she had lost all face. But what could she do? There was no other way. Things had come to this point, she could only do this. What she didn't expect was that this little bastard would be so eloquent. Even she was forced into a situation where she couldn't advance or retreat. If she had known that she would become so restless, she wouldn't have thought about the little bit of Hellion blood in her body that year and didn't eliminate this little bastard completely. She only destroyed her martial chi and broke her meridians, thinking that she would be fine after becoming a good-for-nothing. When Jiao needed to advance, she could extract Hellion blood from this good-for-nothing at any time and anywhere to help Jiao break through the bottleneck quickly. Now it seemed that she shouldn't have left this troublesome little bastard alive. She should have killed her just like how she killed her mother, that bitch. Hellion Vivian's gaze fell on Su Yangmo's pair of eyes filled with malice, very lightly laughed. Madam, you think too much, I have never blamed you all. It's hate. I can't wait to turn all of you into ashes as a sacrifice to the hundreds of loyal souls of the Hellion family who were persecuted because of the change of ownership of the family. Madam has taken care of me for so long, I still want to repay her kindness. That year, when you made my mother so angry that she fell ill and left, I will let you have a taste of the same feeling. What's there to talk about forgiving or not forgiving? This is only the beginning. If I don't expose your true colors and force you into a dead end, how can I be worthy of the humiliation you have inflicted on me all these years? You're really treating me like an outsider. This is only the beginning. I only slapped your face once and lost face once. How is that enough? What I want is for your Su family to pay the blood debt in blood. Just wait until I rise little by little and empty your Su family. At that time, your expression will definitely be interesting. Chapter 194. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian ran her fingers across the thin calluses on her fingertips. Looking at Su Yangmo's slightly stiff face, she slowly smiled. No matter how much hatred Su Yangmo had in her heart, she could only force a gentle smile on her face and wait for this matter to pass quietly. Fortunately, the retired emperor had accepted her explanation. No matter how terrible the situation was now, her beloved daughter was still the genius that everyone supported and was most likely to become the third princess consort. She believed that the retired emperor would also consider this point. In the Dragon War Empire, it was useless no matter how smart one was. Only those who had extraordinary martial chi cultivation had the right to speak. That little bastard, sooner or later, he would pay the price for what he did today. She was not in a hurry. Su Yang Mo lowered her eyes and fiddled with the prayer beads in her hand. She was led by the young monk to the most remote courtyard of the temple. Generally speaking, women were not allowed to stay in the temple because they were worried that they would violate the temple's rules. However, the difference between the hidden spirit temple and other temples was that because it was known as a royal temple, the people who came to offer incense and pray every year were basically the high-ranking members of the royal family. Among them, there were many women who would be in danger when they went down the mountain at night. Therefore, the temple set aside a courtyard to accommodate the women. However, this courtyard looked too desolate. The decorations inside were also very simple, just like a cold palace. The only good thing was that there was no smell in the room. But just this was enough to make Su Yang Mo unbearable. Since young, she had always been the apple of everyone's eye. Even after she snatched Helian Guang Yaro, she was still pampered and respected. Even in the circle of Sijio City, which one of those high officials and nobles did not rush to curry favor with her when they saw her? Now, she was forced to live in a place that was worse than a woodshed. The hatred that Su Yang Mo had just suppressed all gushed out in an instant. Helian Jiawa came with her mother. When she saw the house, she subconsciously covered her mouth and nose with a handkerchief. She reached out and pulled Su Yang Mo's sleeve. "Mother, let's go find grandfather and ask him to go directly to the palace to hand over the memorial. How can anyone live in such a house?" "No, mother, you can't live here. If I don't live here, then you have to." Madame Su glanced at her, then pulled her hand out and gently closed the wooden door. Only then did she reveal the viciousness in her eyes. "Your grandfather is now thinking of a way to get the military power in his hands. He must coax the emperor to come and not make any mistakes. If we let him submit a memorial for such a small matter, the retired emperor will not be happy." Helian Jiawa clenched her fists. "What should we do? Is mother really going to stay here for a month? Mother will find a way to get out of here in less than a month." You, on the other hand, Madame Su looked at her. There was a hint of coldness in her eyes. How many times has mother said that no matter what happens, you have to suffer until the end in front of others? You can't easily reveal your true feelings. All these years, you have been doing very well. Mother has never told you much, but today, you almost made mother unable to clean up the mess. Helian Jiawa lowered her eyes and bit her red lips. "Mother, your daughter is wrong." As she spoke, she fiercely gritted her teeth. "It's just that that little bitch is too hateful. Look at what she said. Not only was it directed at me, but it was also directed at you, mother. She put us in an awkward position in front of everyone. I won't let this matter go so easily. That little bitch has grown up to be what she is today." It is indeed unexpected. Su Yang Mo reached out her hand and patted the back of Helian Jiawa's hand. "Don't worry, she won't be able to get any benefits with such a savage temperament. The martial chi test is coming soon. Your grandfather should have told you to focus on this. Jiawa, you have to understand that in our Dragon War Empire, one's family background and martial chi are the most important. No matter how much that little bitch tosses around, she won't be able to make a splash. Now that she has been expelled from the family, it is impossible for her to participate in any big meetings, unless she really has some kind of innate ability. But as you can see, in this time's test, she didn't even dare to touch martial chi. The armaments she made are indeed amazing, but as long as there is a day when she doesn't have martial chi, then the things she makes will not be recognized by the elders. Even if she is the only disciple of Grandmaster Zi Zun, she can only stare blankly at that pile of scrap metal. This is life. So, Jiawa, you don't have to dirty your hands for such a little bitch. When you stand out in the martial chi test, you won't even know where she went. Do you understand what I said?" Helian Jiawa nodded, her fingers clenched again. "Mother, I understand what you said, but to let me suffer such a loss, I really can't take it lying down. If the people in the capital knew about this, who knows what they would say about me and mother. So you have to win even more." Su Yang Mo's gaze was long, her tone was determined to win. "Your father has already contacted the people of Profound Heaven. You just have to wait for the best armaments to go on stage." After so many days, Helian Jiawa finally heard a piece of news that made people feel comfortable. She reached out and held Su Yang Mo's arm, Her tone carried a hint of coquettishness. "But I heard that recently, there is an unknown little beggar in the capital. He is so arrogant that every aristocratic family has been challenged by him once. If I meet him during the test, what should I do?" "You don't have to worry about this." Su Yang Mo smiled faintly. "Jiawa, you have to remember, you have the gospel of the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Even the elders of the 4 major families want to protect you. A little beggar, your grandfather will find a way to help you deal with it." When Helian Jiawa thought about the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl, there was no joy on her face. Instead, her eyes darkened and she muttered absent-mindedly, "But that year, I was not the only one who was divined to be the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Mother, didn't you see it too? At that time, the divine monk said that both I and that bitch could be the reincarnation." "Jiawa!" Su Yang Mo suddenly shouted sternly, her face carrying a never-before-seen seriousness. "Don't talk about this in the future." Helian Jiawa naturally knew that she had said something wrong. In an instant, her beautiful face turned pale and her eyes turned back and forth. Su Yang Mo let out a long sigh and reached out to stroke her beloved daughter's long hair. "Right now, there is only the 2 of us, mother and daughter, so there is nothing to worry about. But who knows when the walls have ears? Jiawa, remember, the divine monk said that the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl is you, and it can only be you. Do you understand?" "I understand." Helian Jiawa lowered her head and was silent for a long time. Su Yang Mo looked at the bamboo forest outside the window, her narrowed eyes filled with unpredictable malice. It seemed that that little bastard could not be left alive. Chapter 195. Su Yang Mo understood better than anyone that the reason why the Helian Jiawa could receive so much protection was because of the rumor that she was the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Although the War Dragon Empire was ruled by the royal family, there were many things that the royal family had to consider the feelings of the 4 great clans. This was a phenomenon that had existed since the founding of the War Dragon Empire, and no one could break it. But when the divine monk calculated that the Phoenix Girl was about to descend, the situation changed. The elders of the 4 great clans wanted to use the Phoenix Girl to rule the imperial court, so they let the divine monk continue to calculate where the Phoenix Girl would descend. The divine monk was unwilling. This kind of leaking of heaven's secrets was often exchanged with calamity. No one wanted to die. If the elders hadn't threatened him with the lives of many monks in the temple, the divine monk wouldn't have agreed to continue. Finally, after 3 days and 3 nights, the divine monk finally calculated where the Phoenix Girl would descend, but there were 2 children in that courtyard at that time. The divine monk wasn't sure which child was the Phoenix Girl, so Su Yang Mo simply pushed her daughter out and locked up the little vile spawn, not letting her out again. Because of this calculation, the divine monk abruptly aged 10 years, no longer wanting to care about worldly affairs. But Su Yang Mo was not at ease. The only person who knew the situation was this divine monk. Getting rid of him would mean that her daughter was the world's first and only Phoenix Girl. Thus, she sent out 3 waves of killers, finally forcing the divine monk to jump off the cliff. Now that old bald donkey should have turned into a pile of bones. But now that these 2 children were growing up, it would soon be time to determine who was the Phoenix Girl. Of course, Su Yang Mo felt that only her beloved daughter would be the real Phoenix Girl reincarnation. But she couldn't prevent another kind of accident from happening. Because of this kind of framing incident, the retired emperor's mood didn't seem to be very good, so even his previous habits were cancelled. Everyone returned to their own rooms, preparing to rest. Of course, there were still people who didn't forget the main task. At this moment, Abbot Fang Zhong was sitting in his meditation room, fiddling with the prayer beads in his hand. The atmosphere was a bit low. The little monk standing outside didn't even dare to enter. Sitting in front of him was Beligaju. His expression was cold and demonic, with a hint of evil. That kind of evil aura could not be suppressed even in a Buddhist holy land. On the contrary, it was because of such an environment. It made him look even more handsome, like a demon or an immortal. Head Abbot Fang Zhong tilted his head, his gaze looking into the man's eyes. Beligaju, on the other hand, raised his chin slightly, making his gaze appear elegant and indifferent. I know that every time you come to my place, You won't say anything, but... Abbot Fang Zhong's white finger pointed outside the window. Someone is worried about you. Every year, on the surface, he comes to pray for blessings, but in reality, he is most concerned about you. What do you want me to say? A faint voice resounded in the meditation room where only the two of them were present, bringing with it a gradually chilling coldness. Belagaju's slender fingers tapped the handle of the wooden chair. His body leaned back, his long legs crossed. His gaze looked straight at head Abbot Fang Zhong. The corners of his lips curved up, making people think of a series of negative words, such as arrogance, ridicule, indifference. Head Abbot Fang Zhong closed his eyes and sighed, using his fingers to massage his own temples. He dared to bet that this day's bathing, praying to Buddha, meditating and chanting scriptures would all be wasted. Because the person he wanted to cure had absolutely no intention of talking to him at all. These past few years, retired emperor would be like this every year, asking him to counsel the third prince. However, Belagaju was a pool of stagnant water, a gorgeous pool of stagnant water. When he was smiling yet not smiling, that was the time when he had the most offensive power. When he raised his eyes, it was as if he could instantly pry into other people's inner world. Making him chat with this kind of person really made his heart tired. For example, what kind of mood changes have you had recently? Head Abbot Fang Zhong was really helpless. You are very clear that you are like a martial cultivator who can explode at any time. You should have recently recovered your martial qi. Don't tell me you don't have anything you want to do. Bailey Jiao smiled. That kind of smile was like a red spider lily that bloomed on the road to hell. It was in full swing. Does killing count? Head Abbot Fang Zhong almost spat out the tea he drank. This had to be written down, because this stinking brat could very well be telling the truth. What the retired emperor was most afraid of was that, apart from killing people, he would not be able to find any other pleasure. Belagaju leaned back and said in a calm and indifferent voice, "You seem to be very excited. Cough, besides killing people, don't you have anything else you want to do?" Head Abbot Fang Zhong thought of the main question he wanted to ask this time. For example, you aren't young anymore, right? Have you ever thought of looking for a wonderful marriage? This old monk heard from your imperial grandfather that you chose the eldest daughter of the Hellion family. Looking at her today, I can see that she's actually intelligent. However, haven't you always liked white, clean, and easy to bully little white rabbits? How come your preferences have changed? Head Abbot Fang Zhong actually really wanted to directly ask, "Are you thinking of using him?" Belagaju's mouth slowly draws a curve. Abbot Fang Zhong's scalp goes numb from his smile. Only then did he say in a monotonous voice, "What does good prey have to do with what they look like?" Prey. Head Abbot Fang Zhong's face was full of question marks, but this was a good sign. It really was a good sign. In the past, when they sat together, if he didn't speak, then he would speak venomously. Answering one of his questions so normally like today was really too rare. Head Abbot Fang Zhong wrote at a high speed, almost moved to tears. Obtaining a bit of information about this stinking brat's thoughts was really too difficult. Today, this lord's mood is good, I can chat with you a bit more. Belagaju propped up his chin with his fingertips, his whole body emitting a condescending arrogance. Head Abbot Fang Zhong was startled, then he raised his eyes, a bit not daring to believe what he heard. Wait a minute, third prince, this person's words should be heard in reverse. Belagaju's mouth hung a smiling expression, his tone was light. If he wanted to, he could practically make the listener feel as if they were bathed in a spring breeze. If this lord says this lord has always wanted to obtain a person, but until now, I still haven't obtained it, what kind of suggestion would the abbot give this lord? Is there anyone in this world that you can't obtain? Head Abbot Fang Zhong was shaken. That person must have a very strong willpower to be able to refuse this kind of face that swallows both men and women. Belagaju also seemed to be quite vexed, but the words he said didn't have the slightest bit of emotion. That's why this lord is thinking whether or not to remove her claws and directly tie her up. Head Abbot Fang Zhong. Chapter 196. In the end, did he fancy a person or a pet, and even tie her up? It'd be strange if the other party was willing. Head Abbot Fang Zhong pretended to be serious and coughed twice. It's best if you don't do that. Belagaju slanted his face and looked at Head Abbot Fang Zhong with half-opened eyes. That expression seemed to be asking why. Head Abbot Fang Zhong put down the brush in his hand. First of all, what you fancy is a person, right? Everyone has emotions. Let's put it this way, if someone tied you up, what would you do? You definitely wouldn't be happy. This lord won't be unhappy. As long as those people are killed, it's fine. Why would I be unhappy? Belagaju leisurely sipped a mouthful of tea and curved his lips into a half-smile, as if he was talking about a matter that wasn't a big deal. Head Abbot Fang Zhong really wanted to grab him by the collar and roar, "Do you think everyone in the world is as abnormal as you? However, what you said is right, I can't tie her up." Belagaju wrinkled his long eyebrows, as if he had a headache over this issue. Head Abbot Fang Zhong was flabbergasted. Just as he was wondering why this stinking brat suddenly became enlightened, he heard him say again, "It's a bit of a pity to break those pair of claws like this. As long as she peacefully stays by this lord's side, this lord doesn't have to tie her up." Cough, that's the reasoning, right? Head Abbot Fang Zhong felt like he was about to be brainwashed. He actually had nothing to say in response to this stinking brat's word. Belagaju glanced at him, the curve of his neck was graceful and perfect, but his tone suddenly became cold. "It's a pity that she doesn't know how to live peacefully." Belagaju said the last sentence very heavily. His voice was full of texture, yet it didn't have a trace of warmth. It echoed in the empty room, and one only felt like the surrounding air was sucked away by him. Head Abbot Fang Zhong suddenly felt cold all over his body. "Then what do you plan to do?" "Lock her up." Belagaju changed his sitting position, graceful as before. "After a few more days, she can completely belong to this lord." Hearing this, Head Abbot Fang Zhong opened his eyes wide in shock. "You're talking about that eldest miss of the Hellion family?" Belagaju faintly hummed in response. Head Abbot Fang Zhong's coughing became even more severe. "Mommy, are you choosing a consort? This is simply tormenting people. How in the world did that Hellion family's eldest daughter provoke this king of hell, making him mess with her like this? I don't think that's a good idea." Abbot Fang Zhong drank a mouthful of tea and probingly said, "That girl's engagement was broken off before, she's already pitiful enough, and now she's being locked up by you. How did she offend you that you have to be like this?" Belagaju's fingers stiffened and his thin lips moved. His voice was so soft that it was as if he had never spoken before. "She doesn't have me in her eyes." "What?" Head Abbot Fang Zhong didn't hear clearly. He pricked up his ears and said, "If you don't want to say it, then forget it. It's really a sin, a sin." Saying this, Head Abbot Fang Zhong put his palms together and chanted a mitta per Buddha. Belagaju, however, laughed. The corners of his mouth curled into a devilish smile. "Sin? I've already said that I've had enough. The things I want, if people block, I'll kill them. If Buddha, I'll kill Buddha. Do I still lack this one time? If you want to blame someone, blame her for provoking me. After provoking me, she wants to retreat. How could there be such a good thing in this world? You want to destroy her?" Head Abbot Fang Zhong's voice also trembled. He didn't know if it was his misperception, but at this moment, he unexpectedly saw a demonic nature on Belagaju's body. Only, that kind of demonic nature was too perfect. It was like a god standing in the darkness, falling into the chaos of the ninth heaven. It was so demonic that it made people fascinated and timid. Belagaju laughed, endlessly bewitching. "No, why would I want to destroy her? This prey that makes my entire body heat up when I hear her name. I only want to press her under my body and fiercely have her." Saying the last two words, Belagaju curved his thin lips. That ascetic face carried a sensual flavor that could practically bewitch all men and women. "You're joking, right?" Head Abbot Fang Zhong suddenly jumped up. He finally realized that something wasn't right. This was clearly the symptoms of a little boy's first awakening of love, right? But first awakening of love? Head Abbot Fang Zhong glanced at Belagaju again. These 4 words really weren't suitable for the royal family. Moreover, what kind of awakening of love would open so viciously? What binding locking that was really enough. Belagaju raised his eyebrows again, but she doesn't seem to want me to do that. You have to treat women a bit more gently. After head abbot Fang Zhong finished speaking, he felt very helpless. Why did he, a monk, have to discuss this kind of issue with a prince in a temple? Did this stinky brat not have a maid to accompany him to his bed? Were all the hidden guards in the palace all dead? They didn't know to find a woman for his master to properly learn. However, he had always thought that this stinky brat didn't have this kind of requirement. After all, he'd heard that the number of women he'd thrown out of the palace along with their blankets, if there weren't 10, there were at least 9. Every single one was treated like garbage and disposed of. After the retired emperor used this kind of method to send people to this stinky brat's side a few times, he didn't send any more. Because he was afraid that in the future, if this were to spread out, there would be people saying that the third prince couldn't have sec. Head abbot Fang Zhong let out a long sigh. He'd also seen the way this stinky brat treated women. He was courteous, but he was a bit too indifferent and heartless. He simply had no desires and no demands, even more plain than him, a monk. Ari, now that he thought about it, what no desires and no demands, it was all nonsense. Head abbot Fang Zhong held his forehead and started to have a headache thinking whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. The good thing was that this stinky brat finally had some human feelings. The bad thing wasn't his desire to monopolize a bit too strong. Moreover, he was only treating Hellion Vivian as prey. This has nothing to do with being gentle or not, she will resist this highness. Belagaju absent-mindedly interrupted head abbot Fang Zhong's contemplation, the light in his eyes deep and long. You've already tried. Head abbot Fang Zhong's eyes widened into round black grapes. This stinky brat shouldn't have taken advantage of this trip to do something to her, right? Belagaju lazily raised his eyes. What does this have to do with you? No, this old monk is helping you analyze the situation. Head abbot Fang Zhong had a straight face. Belagaju indifferently stood up. No need. Head abbot Fang Zhong. How can you talk halfway? This will make people feel stifled to death. Okay, perhaps. She's resisting you because she has someone else in her heart. Head abbot Fang Zhong really thought this way. After all, women would usually keep their chastity for the sake of that cinnabar mole in their heart. In addition, Hellion Vivian had just had her marriage annulled, she still hadn't forgotten Murong Changfeng and so on. These were all possibilities. Chapter 197. Having heard what was said, Bailey Jiaoju's leaving footsteps paused. His eyes that were as dark as the night completely opened. That kind of indifferent feeling accompanied by a smile that was not a smile gradually disappeared from the corners of his mouth. He was currently frowning, as if pondering something. When his black hair fell down, it just happened to cover that pair of cold eyes. Demonic coldness and hostility simultaneously spread out from the corners of his eyes. There was also a kind of indescribable emotion, like a sharp thorn that could pierce a person's heart. Abbot Fang Zhong was thinking, that girl who became the object of that stinky brat's imagination is really pitiful. He didn't know that in the instant the wooden door closed, Belagaju's hands hidden under his long sleeves clenched bit by bit. A ruthless aura lingered around him, the aura becoming stronger and stronger. The bluestone path under his feet was affected by his ruthless aura, continuously releasing catcher sounds, as if it would fall apart in the next moment. He walked step by step into the boundless night. In the long wind, the surname Tang continuously poured into his ears. Following that, he turned around, slowly walking towards the courtyard wing that he originally shouldn't have gone to. It was night, the rain had just stopped. The early summer wind blew through the bamboo forest, hitting one's face would always make one feel indescribably comfortable. Hellion Vivian raised her head as she sat in the wooden tub that was half a person's height, feeling the comfortable gentleness of the water. Normally, Hellion Vivian would let Yuan Ming stay in the Xuanhuan space. As for Little White, it was still in the midst of the heavenly tribulation, so Hellion Vivian might as well let it sleep. Once this period of time passed, she would wake it up. That way, when it came out, it wouldn't be struck by lightning. She was the only one in the room. Probably because it was on the mountain, the air was much better at night. The The green bamboo forest rustled, the tranquility was long, making Hellion Vivian forget that in order to obtain the incense wood, she had knelt down on the 199 steps and received a light injury. That injury wasn't big to begin with, it was just a bit inconvenient to soak in the bath. The injury was on her knee, so when soaking in the water, she would feel a bit of pain. Hellion Vivian didn't mind. In the past, when she was on a mission, her injuries were much more serious than this. After a bath, she would just apply something casually. It was too humid on the mountain, and ancient clothes were cumbersome. If it was somewhere else, Hellion Vivian could just wear a pair of slim-fit sports shorts. This kind of wound could be cured after a day of drying. Hellion Vivian thought as she yawned, holding a glass of sake in her hand. When she was in modern times, her favorite thing to do was to nestle in her 1-meter-wide double bathtub, drinking red wine while taking orders. Sometimes, she would even read novels on her tablet. Even in ancient times, this habit still couldn't be changed. However, there was no hope of reading novels on a tablet. Fortunately, the scenery was peaceful. Hellion Vivian reached out her hand and was about to put down the wine glass in her palm when she heard a creak. The wooden door that she had locked opened. Hellion Vivian was stunned. Her gaze landed on the several green bamboos beside the moon gate swaying gently under the moonlight. The man was standing in the moonlight. He was wearing a flowing cloud-patterned wide-sleeved brocade robe. On the snow-white undershirt, there were vivid and lifelike bamboos, as if they were soaked in ink. His long black hair was tied up and scattered on his broad back, making him look like an ancient god. "Your Highness." Behind that man, there seemed to be Shadow's anxious voice. After all, this was Hidden Spirit Temple. The womenfolk and the men lived separately. Like Bailey Jiaoju, breaking into the courtyard on the side was already breaking the rules. And Ying was only glad that it was already late and most of the people who were sleeping were already asleep. As for the remaining few, he had the ability to deal with them. Otherwise, if they followed His Highness's actions, they would be invited by the Emperor Emeritus for tea tomorrow. Beligaju acted as if he didn't hear anything. He waved his wide sleeves and that wooden door seemed to have sensed something and closed again, not leaving a single gap. He stood by the wooden tub and looked at her condescendingly. After a while, he said, "You want to talk to this Highness about what's going to happen next without wearing anything?" Hellion Vivian just remembered that although this tub of hot water was deep and had been sprinkled with rose petals, it wasn't that it wasn't clear. In an instant, red clouds spread from her cheeks. Hellion Vivian picked up the towel beside her and didn't forget to remind Beligaju, "I'll have to trouble your Highness to turn around." Bailey Jiaoju looked at that patch of red, as if there were wild weeds growing wildly in his heart, slightly itching. He tightly clasped his fingers, within his ink-black eyes flashed an unknown light, once again unhurriedly sized up Wei Wei for a while, only then did he quite reservedly turn around. Hellion Vivian quickly wrapped that long towel around her body and firmly tied a knot. There were no clothes on the side, so if she wanted to wear clothes, she had to pass by the man and go to the other side. Hellion Vivian thought about it and didn't think there was anything wrong. Since she was wrapped in a towel, she might as well just walk barefoot on the wooden floor. When she passed by Beligaju, she glanced at his face. His thick eyelashes were slightly closed and there was a strong aura of self-restraint. It seemed that a certain Highness didn't have any intention of looking at her, so she could be at ease and boldly go get her clothes. But what she didn't expect was that as soon as she walked over, Beligaju's body moved. It was probably because his eyes were closed and he didn't know which direction she would come from. Moving aside like this, she directly bumped into his arms. The incomparably fresh sandalwood scent instantly entered her nose. It smelled good and noble, very typical. Hellion Wei Wei frowned as she watched him slowly open his pair of eyes. Those were a pair of eyes that carried a sense of inquiry, and the shape of those eyes carried a bit of playfulness and mockery. Even so, it didn't conceal the intellectual and aloof temperament that he revealed. "Are you doing this on purpose?" Deliberately bumping into this Highness's arms. "Your Highness, you're really thinking too much." Hellion Vivian laughed evilly and wanted to push him away. Helplessly, the strip of cloth that was tied with the towel fell into the other's palm. That pair of very slender hands, in White Academy, were holding Taoist scriptures and scrolls. Outside of White Academy, they were holding the universe under the heavens. It was so beautiful that it easily made people think of the white porcelain antiques displayed in museums. This kind of hand was very suitable for holding goblets, but it was more suitable for killing people. But right now, his hand was holding the strip of cloth that she used to tie the towel. This made Hellion Vivian feel that everything was so abnormal. "Your Highness, don't you think you should let go of your hand?" Hellion Vivian smiled and crossed her arms. "I don't think that your Highness came here in the middle of the night just to play with the strip of cloth on my towel." Beligaju made a sound of en and slowly approached her. With one hand behind her back, the light in his eyes pressed down. Chapter 198. Standing in Hellion Vivian's position, she could only see half of his neck and his smooth jawline. If she got closer, she could see his light-colored thin lips, which looked quite ascetic and sexy. This kind of man was not only invincible among women, but he would also be popular among men. However, she was the ace agent of the 21st century, and it seemed a bit unreasonable for her to be pressed against the wall like this. "Your Highness, I have a bad temper." Hellion Vivian followed his posture and reached out to grab his collar. Her action was cool and she didn't retreat at all. Her thin lips smiled, so, some jokes are better not made. Beligaju looked at her action and smiled playfully. That mocking look seemed to be saying, "What are you thinking? Do you think this Highness will touch you?" Hellion Vivian shrugged. Some words should be said in advance to be safe. Who knows what this third prince is thinking? Bailey Jiaju slowly straightened his body. With an indescribable coldness, he pushed the person away. He leisurely reached out his hand to adjust his collar. His actions were very stylish as he commanded, "You can go and put on your clothes." Hellion Vivian didn't relax because of this sentence. Looking at the boudoir that was only covered by an ancient painting, she raised her eyebrows. "Your Highness, you don't want to go out? This Highness is right here. You can change." Beligaju casually lay down on the wooden bed. His movements were languid and his expression was indifferent, as if he was the master of this room. Hellion Vivian, how could she change here? And she hadn't slept on that bed herself. Wasn't this a bit too overbearing? Hellion Vivian looked up at the night sky outside. Wasting time would only be a waste of time. Anyway, it was just changing clothes and there was a screen between them. It wasn't a big deal. Moreover, when they really fulfilled the contract, even if they didn't have sex, they would have to sleep in the same room. Getting used to being alone in advance would be helpful for living together in the future. Hellion Vivian had a nimble personality. In the end, she glanced at Beligaju before taking the clothes and walking to the other side of the ancient painting. She first put the clothes in her hand on the wooden rack on the side of the painting, then slowly began to unwrap the towel wrapped around her body. What Hellion Vivian didn't know was that such an ancient painting actually didn't have much of an effect. It even made her movements of putting on clothes more clear. Her exquisite curves were reflected on the painting. Just as Hellion Vivian turned sideways to take the outer garment, she felt as if there was a gaze sliding over her body inch by inch, which made her inexplicably hot. Wei furrowed her eyebrows. Was it an illusion? How could she have this kind of illusion? She shook her head. She didn't think that the third prince would be interested in her. Because when she came out, the man's face was as cold as always. If it wasn't for that silver mask softening his expression a bit, people would feel that he was even more unapproachable. Moreover, his eyes were closed. Hellion Vivian used the towel to dry her long hair. She lazily sat on the wooden chair opposite the bed and was about to speak. Just as she was about to speak, she heard Beligaju's indifferent voice say, "Come here." Hellion Vivian didn't refuse his words. Because there was no point in refusing. They still had a long time to work together. Only, what she didn't expect was that as soon as she approached, Beligaju suddenly pulled her over. His slightly cold fingers pressed down on her knees. His voice was cold. What happened? Hellion Vivian was stunned. She didn't think that the third prince would care about her injuries. Although the way he cared was a bit strange. When I was asking for the incense wood, I knelt down too many times. It's abraded. Hellion Vivian didn't want to have such delicate skin, but this body really hadn't suffered much in the past. When she kowtowed to the 80th step, she felt the burning sensation on her knees. At that time, she was pressed for time, so she didn't pay much attention to it. Now, it seemed that this injury was a bit ugly. No wonder even the third prince frowned in disdain. Beligaju didn't say anything. He pushed her away again, stood up, and opened the door. When he came in again, he was holding a box of things that Hellion Vivian had never seen before. But from the smell, it was definitely something good. It was light and cool, and it even had a pleasant smell of plants. Hellion Vivian's nose twitched. Before she could open her mouth to ask, she felt an extremely comfortable force on her knees. Hellion Vivian's fingers stiffened. She looked down at the bottom of her feet. That pair of eyes was still indifferent without any warmth. His slender fingertips brushed past her legs. It was very cold. Because she was injured in the knee, when he cleaned the wound, he had to lower himself than she was sitting. Hellion Vivian saw that even though the other person was looking up, he was still able to achieve the effect of a monarch's aura. She couldn't help but kick her own calf. It was a complete knee-jerk reflex. She almost kicked off that silver mask, but the man grabbed her ankle. Her ankle was very thin. It was white and smooth as if it would break with a snap. Probably because it was too thin, Beligaju's hand was more than enough to hold it. The man raised his eyebrows. His tone was cold. "Did you do it on purpose?" Hellion Vivian looked up at the sky. "No. You seem to be very regretful that you didn't kick this prince's face." When Beligaju's voice was cold, it was really easy to think of a decision-making president sitting in the office. Hellion Vivian cleverly changed the topic. "What did you apply on me?" "Tianshan Snow Lotus." With the royal's temperament, one couldn't expect him to say more than one word when answering a question. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Tianshan Snow Lotus? Shouldn't natural snow lotuses be taken orally? It's just a pill. You can use it however you want." Beligaju gave her something on one side and signaled her to hold it by herself. Then he went to apply the other side. His every move was full of the elegance of a Shangxian. Wei Wei was a bit restless. Snow lotus in the sky, it said that if one ate one, it could boost one's martial chi for 3 years. Quite a few martial artists, in order to be able to obtain it, waited for years at the foot of Great White Mountain, precisely for the sake of waiting for it to bloom once every 10 years. Furthermore, this thing often grew on the precipitous cliffs and precipitous walls, and wasn't that easy to pick. That's why, within the capital, those shops that sold sacred medicines, the price of Tianshan Snow Lotus had always been the most expensive among the most expensive. Not many people were willing to buy it. Even if the Defense Division's residents wanted this thing, they still had to weigh their own expenses. However, Third Prince unexpectedly used it as the most common medicinal paste. The world of capitalists was really not something that human beings could understand. Hellion Vivian finally realized that she was really marrying a tall, rich, and handsome man and had reached the peak of life. Chapter 199. Your Highness, it's the middle of the night. Shadow, who was standing outside, softly reminded him. He raised his head and looked at the eastern sky. The masters of Hidden Spirit Temple all woke up early. If they found out that a prince entered a side room in the middle of the night, who knows what the consequences would be? It's very possible that the reputation of the eldest daughter of the Hellion family would be completely ruined. Beligaju naturally knew this. Originally, it was so late today, he shouldn't have come to this place. Wrinkling his long eyebrows, Beligaju lazily made an en sound and withdrew his hand. He faced Hellion Vivian and said indifferently, "Tomorrow you go find Eunuch Sunday. He will arrange a new carriage for you." "Not too good." Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed and her thin lips carried a smile. Being taken care of too much is easy to attract jealousy. Beligaju raised his eyes and glanced at her. His voice didn't have the slightest fluctuation. "Eunuch's son will find a good excuse." "Okay then." In any case, Hellion Vivian also wanted to stay in the carriage a bit more comfortably. Since she didn't need to worry about anything else, There was no reason to refuse to enjoy. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian lazily yawned again and instructed Belagaju, "When you go out, help me close the door. There are many mosquitoes in the bamboo forest." Was this woman ordering His Highness? Shadow listened to the words in the room and silently looked at the sky. When he came back to his senses, Belagaju had already walked out. "Your Highness." Shadow hesitated for a moment. In the end, he didn't report the recent information to his master. He thought to wait and see. Maybe it was a trap. After all, Miss Yoon was different from other women. Even Shadow didn't understand why His Highness would choose this young lady of the Hellion family. Could it be that he wanted to divert the attention of the 4 great clans? If it was like this, then it made sense. Only, that young lady of the Hellion family was pitiful. She probably didn't know anything. Shadow looked behind him again and raised his feet to follow Belagaju. The next day, the weather was fine and the breeze was gentle. The opening meal was still vegetarian dishes. The vegetable leaves were all from the back of the temple. They were picked and eaten immediately. After a few stir-frying, the aroma would fill the air. It was obvious that the retired emperor was in a good mood today. After breakfast, he didn't ask the students to accompany him. Instead, he went to the backyard of the temple to fulfill his vow. Other than praying for blessings, the most efficacious thing in the hidden spirit temple was praying for marriage. Now that they were already here, there weren't many noble ladies who weren't tempted. However, it wasn't convenient for them to say so directly, so they could only be led by a servant girl, saying that they were going to burn incense. Hellion Vivian didn't want to get involved in this kind of thing. Taking advantage of the fact that there weren't many people around, she grabbed Hei's sleeve. Hei's found it strange. "Yo, you actually took the initiative to look for me. Put away that creepy tone of yours." Hellion Vivian opened her palm, revealing a string of white Buddhist prayer beads. If a woman wore it, she would definitely look beautiful. "You asked me to ask for it." Hei's eyes lit up. "You really did ask for it. Did you think that all your kowtowing was in vain?" Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and looked at his appearance. "What? You want to give it to that childhood sweetheart of yours to ensure her safety?" Hei's face turned cold. "Who would give it to that ungrateful thing? I took it myself to play with. Take a string of female Buddhist prayer beads and play with it." Hellion Vivian laughed. "Young Master Hei really has a special taste." Hei's didn't get angry and put away the Buddhist prayer beads. "It's better than someone offending the third prince who shouldn't be offended." Hellion Vivian stretched her waist, as if she didn't hear what he said. Hei's voice was very light, but it carried a hint of warning. "Don't let yourself fall into it. The third prince approached you. This matter isn't that simple." Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. The more she listened, the more she felt that Hei's words were implying something. "Young Master Hei, why are you still here?" Eunuch Sun spat at a servant girl and raised his whisk. "The retired emperor is looking for you everywhere." Hei's turned his head and glanced at Eunuch Sunday. He said to Hellion Vivian, "Then I'll leave first. You take care of yourself." Hellion Vivian faintly made a sound of en. Eunuch Sun, however, took another look at this side. After thinking for a bit, he still walked over and said with a smile, "This servant heard that eldest Mrs. Ni was injured. It's time to find a comfortable carriage. This servant has already arranged it. When the retired emperor comes out, a little eunuch will lead eldest Miss there. Eldest Miss doesn't need to worry about anything else." "Thank you for your trouble, Eunuch Sunday," Hellion Vivian said sincerely. She had always treated people this way. She wouldn't treat them differently because of their status. This is what this old servant should do. Eunuch Sun smiled. In the past, he didn't have much thoughts about this young miss from the defense division. He was a eunuch and had seen too many things in the old residence. He also understood why her reputation fell to this point. Even the Murong family wasn't willing to marry her. In general, it was because she didn't have power. A good-for-nothing was a good-for-nothing. She didn't know how to judge the situation and was too naive, so she fell into other people's trap. He didn't understand why his master would choose her. After yesterday's matter, Eunuch Sun really liked Hellion Vivian a little. She was neither servile nor overbearing. She didn't pressure people, but she also didn't shrink back. If His Highness didn't say it, he wouldn't know that the relationship between these two people had already reached this level. If it was someone else, they would have already become spoiled and act like a tyrant. However, along the way, Hellion Vivian didn't deliberately take advantage of His Highness. On the contrary, she was the easiest to serve. Those noble young ladies were also young. They were used to being pampered by their parents at home. When they went out, it was natural for them to order this and that. Obviously, those who could enter the hidden spirit temple weren't too many people. Each young lady and young master could only bring a servant with them. There were many things that they wouldn't show in front of the retired emperor. However, it was different in private. Those few disciples of his were ordered around until they didn't even have the strength to speak. It wasn't that the food wasn't good, it was that the place they lived in was simple and crude. There were even some people who wanted to eat pastries and insisted that the master in the temple make another plate for them. Eunuch Sun had had enough. He just waited until they went down the mountain and found an opportunity to beat their parents. It was probably because he had encountered this kind of thing too many times that Eunuch Sun found Hellion Vivian pleasing to the eye. It wasn't that those noble young ladies didn't have a good heart, it was just that it was very tiring. Hellion Vivian was a little different. She spoke very little and generally didn't take the initiative to talk to anyone. It seemed like she was either looking at the scenery or sleeping. However, as long as she opened her mouth, no matter who it was, she was very polite. This kind of politeness was different from the kind of politeness that Eunuch Sun had seen before. It wasn't that there weren't ministers fawning over him, it was just that Eunuch Sun also knew that those people would turn around and call him a dog servant. However, the feeling that Hellion Vivian gave him was different. How to say it? It was as if he was just like her. He was also a person, not a dog servant. With this kind of temperament, he would definitely be popular in the palace. Eunuch Sun was secretly convinced. His Highness had indeed chosen the right person to enter the palace. Chapter 200. Hellion Vivian smiled. When she looked at Eunuch Sun, there was a light in her eyes. There's one thing, but I don't know if I should say it or not. Eldest miss, there's no harm in speaking. Eunuch Sun was indeed a shrewd person, but his shrewdness made people feel comfortable. Hellion Vivian turned the leaf in her hand, her voice indifferent. Eunuch Sun's subordinate eunuchs are actually very smart, quite good at arranging things. Eunuch Sun didn't think that this sentence was praising them. After staying by His Highness' side for a long time, Eunuch Sun also learned to listen. His heart thumped. Eldest miss, what matter are you referring to? When we came to the hidden spirit temple, my carriage was old and had been tampered with. That's why I got on Miss Chen's carriage. After Hellion Vivian finished speaking, she added another sentence. The broken tree on the mountain was cut very neatly. It wasn't an accident, it should have been broken by internal energy. When Eunuch Sun heard this, he knew what was going on. Retired Emperor put him in charge of this trip to the hidden spirit temple. It could be said that all big and small matters passed through his hands. How could there be a problem with the carriage? Clearly, there was someone who received benefits, which led to the following matters. In a moment, he had to quickly investigate which little bastard under his command had taken something he shouldn't have. It was better to kick him out of the palace as soon as possible, so as to avoid future troubles. Thinking of this, Eunuch Sun raised his eyes again and hesitantly said, "These matters, why didn't eldest miss mention it yesterday? Eunuch Sun is a member of the royal family, and on the way, you didn't step on me. What shouldn't be said, I won't say." Hellion Vivian only said a few words. This made Eunuch Sun's heart tremble. As intelligent as he was, how could he not understand that eldest Miss Hellion was taking care of his face? She left him a way out. Otherwise, if yesterday's matter was completely revealed, even if he didn't know, he would still have to suffer a few beatings. Retired Emperor's biggest taboo was forming cliques for personal gain. He admitted that he was a bit greedy, but he never thought of betraying his master, and also didn't think about which family he belonged to. It seemed that it was time to change the group of eunuchs under his command. In the future, the situation in the palace would only become more and more severe. It would not be good for His Highness to keep people who were not absolutely loyal. Eunuch Sun lowered his eyes and bowed. He sincerely said, "This old servant thanks eldest miss." Hellion Vivian smiled. She didn't feel that she had done something very touching. Her style of doing things was indeed very ruthless, but that was towards those who provoked her. For those who didn't provoke her, she would always leave a way out for them. Moreover, the other party was an old man who didn't know anything. There was no need to implicate the innocent. However, Eunuch Sun was smart because he knew what his role was. When Hellion Vivian told him about this, his first reaction was to inform the Emperor Emeritus. The retired emperor's hand that was holding the Buddhist scripture sank. He sneered, "It seems that these people really think that I'm old and muddle-headed." Eunuch Sun lowered his eyes. "It is this old servant's fault. What does this have to do with you? Get up." The Emperor Emeritus folded his sleeves and laughed. "However, that girl is indeed affectionate and righteous. She also has a sense of propriety. In the future, if she is by our Jew's side, this emperor will be able to leave with peace of mind." Eunuch Sun opened his mouth. He didn't know how to use this topic. He understood His Highness' temperament. He would rather kill 1,000 by mistake than let go of one person. There was no other way. His natural disposition was so cold. He was elegant and proper, but his methods were too ruthless. Just like what the Emperor Emeritus said, he also hoped that there was such a person who could prevent His Highness from creating too many evil creatures after ascending the throne. "Let them all come in." The Emperor Emeritus drank the medicine in his hand and put down the Buddhist scripture. His tone was indifferent as he ordered. At this time, Hei's had already arrived. The white Buddhist prayer beads hanging on his hand had not been completely put away. It was seen by his sharp-eyed schoolmate. "Isn't this the body seed from the hidden spirit temple? How did Master Hei's get it?" That person looked at the white beads in Hei's hand enviously. He wanted to reach out and touch it. Hei's faintly glanced at him. That kind of coldness made that person's movements stiffen. Another young master held a paper fan and lightly waved it. He smiled and said, "Brother Li, I think you're really looking for a beating. That body seed was given to Master Hei by someone. When we just arrived, didn't you see Master Hei being held back by someone?" "Held back by someone? By who?" That person doubtfully raised his eyebrows. The young master with the fan chuckled. "Who else could it be? It's that young lady from the Hellion family. This body seed is not easy to get. If you want a bunch, you have to kowtow several dozen times. It's still Master Hei who is charming and makes people admire him so much." A crisp sound rang out. Before he could finish speaking, that young master with the fan was frightened to the point of quivering. The little eunuch serving him almost knelt on the ground. He never thought that he, a royal family member, would unexpectedly spit on the ground when he handed over a cup of tea. Could it be that he didn't hold it steadily just now? That can't be. He even deliberately held it with both hands. Not only did the little eunuch think so much, he frantically wanted to use his sleeve to wipe the tea from Belegaju's hand. However, he was frozen in place by that ice-like gaze. Only, what made him puzzled was that the royal family, who had always loved cleanliness, unexpectedly didn't immediately pull out the white handkerchief himself. Instead, he maintained his forward posture. It was unknown what he was thinking, but that expression even seemed a bit absent-minded. When Eunuch Sun just came out, he saw this kind of scene. Distressed, he cried out, "Did you get scalded anywhere? Hurry up and scoop some ice for His Highness." "Yes, yes." Only then did the little eunuch come back to his senses and hurriedly left. A series of people and horses flipped upside down. Belegaju's gaze never concentrated. Only when it fell on Hei's wrist did it become exceptionally deep and eye-catching. No need. He leisurely brushed off the water droplets on his fingertips, leaving behind a string of obvious red marks on the back of his hand. Hei's raised his eyebrows in his direction. Belegaju didn't even look at him. When he brushed past him, it was an extremely cold temperature. There was no emotion, only a bone-piercing cold. Eunuch's son anxiously followed behind his master, holding the burn ointment in his hand. He already couldn't remember how long it had been since His Highness was injured. It seemed that after that palace fire, he hadn't seen any scars on His Highness's body. How could he be scalded by a cup of hot tea today? Eunuch's son regretted that he didn't stand by Belegaju's side to serve him. The young masters didn't take this matter to heart, because they saw that the third prince's expression didn't have a trace of unhappiness. Instead, the curve of his thin lips was deeper than usual. They just thought that Eunuch's son was making a fuss over nothing. But the retired emperor was the retired emperor after all. That was his grandson. Even though it was hard to see through him since he was young, he still knew his temper. He's not happy. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.